She enjoys traveling to competitions and making new friends with other athletes. Nadia's success is rooted in community engagement and the determination it takes to overcome obstacles. I'm sure all members will join me in congratulating Nadia and her parents Paul and Lynn, along with her coach Maxine Connolly, and everyone who makes the Walden Figure Skating Club successful. Great job, Nadia.
The Honourable Member for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is a trading nation, and our Conservative government's ambitious trade agenda is helping small businesses and the economy and prosper in Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, and across Canada. This past weekend, I had the opportunity to host the Minister of International Trade at 2 roundtables that focused on small businesses and the opportunity to host a global workshop to further promote local growth on an international level. For example, I'm pleased to say that Mayor Joanne van der Hayden of Strathroy-Caradoc and her team have one of the first designated investment-ready certified sites, the largest so far in Ontario, that is recently ready to attract new businesses taking advantage of Canada's stable bank system and low taxes. Mr. Speaker, trade agreements such as CETA encourage prosperity and growth in agriculture, manufacturing, and all industries, and our government's unprecedented support for small business is recognized as the opportunity for them to reach their full potential. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Député de Lac Saint.
The Honourable Member for Lac Saint Louis.
Alison Tippin, a young resident of my riding, on a remarkable scholastic achievement. Alison recently took part in Quebec's Journée des Maths, an online competition that tests students from grade 3 to secondary 4 on their knowledge of mathematics. She placed first in her group for the second year in a row. Competition was so fierce that it required a perfect score to secure top place in her grade 6 group. Math is just one of Alison's talents. She is an accomplished chess player who has participated in national junior tournaments and represented Canada internationally. Alison also enjoys karate, ballet, swimming, and gymnastics. I had the pleasure of hosting Alison, along with her mother Diana and father Vadim, on a recent visit to Parliament Hill. Alison, who already demonstrates a keen understanding of Parliament, was delighted to take in her very first question period from the galleries. Please join me in congratulating Alison and wishing her continued success in her many wonderful endeavours.
The Honourable Member for Oakville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Legalized marijuana in Colorado has not been just good, clean fun. Illegal drug dealers are still thriving as dope smokers avoid the 27.9% sales tax. In 2014, 45 children 8 years old or under ingested marijuana-laced sweets and ended up in poison control centers, some needing intubation or spinal taps in hospital. One young man consumed a marijuana cookie and jumped to his death. Another allegedly shot and killed his wife after eating marijuana candy. In Canada, most dead drivers in car accidents are aged 16 to 24, and 40% of Canadian youth have ridden with a driver who has smoked marijuana. So much for the Liberal leader's brave new world of legalized dope. Shamefully, the Pied Piper of pot announced his legalization plan to teenagers at a Charlottetown high school. While parents are looking for ways to keep their children and teens safe, the Liberal leader would make that harder. He should take advice from one of his old Pink Floyd albums. Hey, leave them kids alone.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Esquimalt-Fuga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are concerned about the end of door-to-door mail delivery. In my riding alone, Canada Post plans to shift 15,000 households to community mailboxes this year. Most residents find this hard to accept, especially after Canada Post's announcement that it made a profit of nearly $200 million again this year. In my riding, residents and their municipalities are still struggling to get answers from Canada Post. Who will cover the costs associated with installing these boxes, like lighting and sidewalks? Who will evaluate pedestrian safety and traffic concerns? Or will Canada Post just wait for accidents to happen? Who will pick up the tab for litter? Who will clean up the graffiti? Who will compensate those whose property values crash when a box is plopped in front of their house? I continue to get phone calls, letters, and emails in my constituency office almost every day asking for help. But Canada Post refuses even to host an open house in my riding to answer questions like these. It's time for the Conservatives to order a halt in this ill-conceived and unnecessary attack on essential public service and good-paying jobs in our communities. It's time for this Conservative government and its cronies at Canada Post to go.
The Honourable Member for Don Valley West.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in the House today to congratulate the Thorncliffe Neighbourhood Office in Don Valley West on their 30th anniversary. This organization has faithfully served the people in my riding and surrounding area, providing a wide range of community services. They give assistance to seniors, conduct valuable job training and job placement services, and facilitate a variety of programs for children and youth. Our government is proud to partner with this organization that assists thousands of newcomers each year in the settlement process. They also operate one of the largest English language instruction programs in all of Ontario. I offer my sincere congratulations to Bill Pashby, Chair of the Board, and Ahmed Hussein, Executive Director, and the entire TNO team. I wish them the very best as they continue to serve our community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Okanagan-Coquihalla.
Mr. Speaker, we often talk on the importance of building bridges with First Nation communities, and I'm happy to announce that in Okanagan-Coquihalla this is happening, literally, as the Penticton Indian Band is building the new Satik crossing over a portion of the Okanagan River system. This new bridge is vital to open up lands for economic development that will in turn create jobs. It is developments like this bridge that have earned the Penticton Indian Band the award of Aboriginal Economic Development Corporation of the Year from the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. And more recently, the band received a coveted Tommy Award for environmental construction for their Skaha Hills development. This is very exciting news for our region, and the Satvik crossing is just one of the many major projects underway or recently completed. But these projects do not happen by accident. I would like to ask the House in joining me in recognizing the leadership of Chief Jonathan Kruger and Council in making these important projects a reality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Brossard-la-Prairie. Mr. Speaker, on May 29, 2012, Montreal police officer Carl Etier, who lives in my riding of Brossard-la-Prairie, came to the rescue of a suicidal woman who was threatening to jump from a 22-story building. Officer Etier and his colleague Officer Roberge scaled a 4-foot-high parapet and crawled along a narrow ledge to get near the intoxicated woman. They had to come dangerously close to the edge in order to reach her and get her to safety. I invite my colleagues here in the House to join me in congratulating Officer Etier and his colleague, Officer Roberge, on this remarkable deed which earned them the Governor-General's Medal of Bravery. This decoration recognizes acts of courage in hazardous circumstances. Our heartiest congratulations and utmost gratitude go out to our men and women in uniform. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dauphin, Swan River, Marquette.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian families know that Conservatives understand that parents know best. Yes. That's why we introduced a family tax cut and enhanced universal child care benefit that will provide support to 4 million Canadian families with children. In fact, this is one of the biggest packages of tax relief for Canadian families in modern history. And, Mr. Speaker, the vast majority of these benefits will go to low or middle income families. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, the high tax and high debt NDP and Liberals have not followed our lead in supporting Canadian families in choosing the type of child care that works for them. Instead, the NDP want to undo our support and oppose a one-size-fits-all bureaucratic scheme that fails to do anything for 90% of families. And the Liberals, well, they've just promised to take our money away. That's shameful, Mr. Speaker. The high tax and high debt NDP and Liberals need to stop listening to their elites and start listening to real Canadian parents. But until they do, our Conservative government will continue to support moms and dads in making the best decisions for their families.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this weekend I joined almost 20 local community associations and environmental groups for a meeting of the Community Association Forum on Environmental Sustainability. Cafes brings together community organizations from across downtown Ottawa to discuss environmental issues, share best practices, and create solutions. It was great to see the creative thinking and collaboration coming from my fellow residents of Ottawa Centre. One of the key issues at Saturday's meeting was developing a plan to promote urban trees in Ottawa. Urban trees help to mitigate climate change, and they also make our cities better places to live. All levels of government should support this agenda. In particular, Canada should join other G7 countries in supporting urban forests at the federal level. From responsible development to public transit to shoreline cleanup, Ottawa's grassroots community organizations are showing great leadership in building greener, more sustainable Ottawa. I'm very proud to represent such an engaged and informed constituency. And Mr. Speaker, on this day, but I also wish my partner, my friend, my wife a very happy birthday.
The honourable member for Selkirk-Interlake.
Mr. Speaker, the terrorist cult ISIL has made clear that it is targeting Canadian civilians. Both the NDP and Liberal leaders had an opportunity to speak to the threat ISIL poses to Canadians, and they opted for partisan attacks over serious dialogue. It is beyond concerning that both of these leaders failed to acknowledge the real threat posed by ISIL and jihadi terrorism to Canada. In fact, the Liberals could barely find speakers on this important issue when it was debated last Thursday. ISIL has declared war on Canada and said no Canadians should feel safe at home. They have already inspired attacks in Canada as well as against our Western allies in Denmark, France, and Australia. And our Conservative government is facing this threat head-on. I encourage all members in this place to support today's motion to extend the mission against ISIL so that they can be degraded to the point where ISIL no longer poses a threat to Canada.
The honourable member for Etobicoke North.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to mourn the passing of my extraordinary friend, Max Kahn, who loved life, was a 3-time cancer survivor, the councillor for Ward 6 in Oakville, a champion for his constituents, and someone who knew the meaning of service. Max was always enthusiastic, interested in asking if he could help. Today we think of Max and his family and friends whom he loved dearly. We extend our condolences to his beloved father, mother, 3 sisters, brother, and a son. Max had been a resident of Oakville for the past 25 years and served as town councillor since 2006. He was thrilled to be nominated federal Liberal candidate for North Oakville, Burlington, and was planning to open his campaign office in just a few weeks with a much-anticipated launch. Oakville has lost a friend, a great man, and words cannot describe the loss to his family, friends, and community.
Member for Grant. The honourable member for Grant.
Mr. Speaker, today the Prime Minister is at the Honda plant in Alliston, Ontario, where he made an important announcement for Canada's automotive and advanced manufacturing sector. For the first time, Honda Canada will use one of its Canadian facilities to produce vehicles to export to Europe. Wow. This is big news for Ontario and for all Canadians, made possible by the historic Canada-EU trade agreement. Wow. When this government came to office, Canada had only 5 free trade agreements in place. Since 2006, we have committed to fixing the 13 dark years of trade under the Liberals, and now Canadian world-class products will have virtually unfettered market access to 43 countries around the world. Under the leadership of this Prime Minister, our government has created the right economic environment for Canadian businesses to succeed in global markets, creating jobs and long-term economic prosperity for all Canadians.
The honourable member for La Pointe de l'Île. Could somebody please remind the finance minister that his job goes all the way to October 19th? He still has work to do. For example, there's a budget to table. Canadians can't wait to see how the government's going to try to cover up the bad economic news that keeps piling up. The drop in the price of oil, the worsening job market, the loss of good jobs at the expense of unstable and part-time jobs, the many store closures, Max, Jacob, Target, and now Future Shop. The provinces are grappling with the same problems, but they seem to be able to table a budget in a timely fashion. So what's keeping the minister from tabling his budget? If he's run out of ideas, he should come talk to us. Every day the NDP comes up with solutions that will help Canadian families. And we will be putting those ideas to work in Budget 2016.
The honourable member for Red Deer.
Mr. Speaker, we know that the high tax, high debt, Liberals and NDP haven't met a tax they didn't like nor want to hike. And we know these high tax, high debt Liberals and NDP think government makes the best choices for families. On this side of the House, our Conservative government believes in keeping more money in the pockets of Canadian parents. Our low-tax plan for families is working, and we're making sure 100% of families with kids benefit with almost $2,000 back in their pockets. If given the chance, the high-tax, high-debt Liberals will take these benefits away to pay for big government that tells you how to raise your kids. The contrast is simple. The Liberals believe bureaucracy knows best when it comes to Canadian families, while we, as Conservatives, believe in keeping money in the hands of the real experts on families. Their names are Mom and Dad.
Oral questions. Question orale. The honourable member for Hull-Elmer.
The Church shop is going out of business. 131 stores closed and 1,500 people out of work. Many won't even qualify for benefits after years of Conservative and Liberal reductions to EI. And, Mr. Speaker, this is just the latest in a growing list of closures. So, with 1,500 more families facing job loss, how can the Conservatives explain their inaction on job creation and the economy?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, while the global economy remains fragile, our government is focused on creating jobs, growth, and economic prosperity. And since the depths of the recession, we've created 1.2 net million jobs in the Canadian economy, and we will continue our low-tax plan for jobs and growth. In contrast, the NDP have a plan to introduce a carbon tax, which is a job-killing plan, $20 billion out of the pockets of ordinary Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Hull-Aylmer. Mr. Speaker, 1,500 people out of work. I think that the Minister of Finance needs to look at these realities head on. These people deserve better than a government that can't even bring down a budget on time and that doesn't have a clear plan for job creation, contrary to the NDP. The list of layoffs in Canada is growing, Mr. Speaker. Mex, Jacob, Target, and now Future Shop. What is the government waiting for to bring down a budget that will make job creation a priority? The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, as regards the budget, stay tuned. The NDP is calling for policies that will deliberately weaken Canadian industries. Our government, on the contrary, knows that Canada is the G7 country that has created the most jobs, proportionately speaking. We have created 20% more jobs than our closest country to compare with. Now, if we were to listen to the NDP, we would see these all costs go up for Canadian taxpayers. The Honourable Member for Hull-Aylmer. Now, the Conservatives aren't just improvising on the budget. The Minister of National Defence had to be rescued by his CDS, General Tom Lawson, who had to rectify the comments made by the Minister on the weekend. Can the Minister confirm that he agrees with the CDS on the fact that Canada and the United States are not the only members of the coalition using precision-guided munitions in Syria? The Honourable Minister of National Defence. Mr. Speaker, I agree with the General, and the Honourable Member is mistaken because the U.S. and Canada are the only allied nations with munitions for dynamic targets. This is one of the reasons why the United States encouraged Canada to broaden our military mission against the Islamic ISIL, in fact. These are dynamic targets, and our weaponry is among the best in the world.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister may be new to this portfolio, but he's not new to politics. This is about our military being involved in a war. The Minister told the media repeatedly that Canada was the only allied country other than the U.S. with precision-guided weapons for use in Syria. The Chief of Defence Staff then had to make a public statement to correct the Minister. Will he now apologise for his hyperbole and start telling Canadians the true facts about our involvement in the Iraq War.
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the member for St. John is incorrect. The statement of the Chief of Defence Staff confirmed what I said, which was based on the advice I received from the military, indicating that currently only the United States is using precision-guided munitions of this nature against ISIL targets. The Royal Canadian Air Force, I'm advised by the Chief of Defence Staff and the military, has amongst the best, most advanced precision-guided munitions in the world that can hit dynamic targets that only the United States is currently using against the genocidal terrorist organization. It's regrettable, however, that the NDP wants Canada to sit on the sidelines in the fight against this genocidal.
The Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister, as usual, chooses to be over the top over providing the facts to the Canadian people. Mr. Speaker, Canadian pilots will, according to the government, be carrying out bombing runs in Syria, and they will face many challenges, including the 131 active surface-to-air missile sites controlled by the government of Syria. Given that the Assad regime is both murderous and untrustworthy, can the Minister provide assurances to the House and to Canadians that Canadian Forces pilots will not be targeted by the Syrian regime?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously there is an inherent risk involved in any military deployment or operation. Having said that, the advice I've received consistently from our military is that the Syrian military does not have radar coverage in that part of Syria. And indeed, we have observed that hundreds, if not thousands, of sorties against ISIL have been flown by the United States and other allies in operations against the genocidal terrorist organization, the so-called Islamic State in eastern Syria. And we're not aware of any efforts to challenge them. Neither ISIL nor the Syrian state has challenged any of those flights. Our assessment is that the risk is no greater flying in Syria, that part of Syria, than it has been in Iraq today.
The Honourable Member for Westmount Ville-Marie.
Mr. Speaker, the most recent survey among business leaders shows that optimism is at its lowest level since the end of the recession. Almost 40% expect the economy to contract this year, as compared with 3% last year. That's a huge drop in expectations, and all of this under the aegis of this government. We've recorded the worst economic growth over the past 80 years. And what's the minister doing? Delaying the budget, and he's vanished. When can we expect a budget? Will it be during the week of April 20th? Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind you that the Liberal finance critic is the one who said Liberals believe that Canadians are prepared to pay more and more taxes. We have no lessons to learn from the Liberals, who have slashed transfers to the provinces and who have still not explained what happened to the $40 billion in taxpayers' money. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government is the only one worthy of confidence for creating jobs.
Honourable Member for Wascana.
This government's record on economic growth is the worst in 80 years. All the chartered banks, the Conference Board, the IMF, the OECD, they've all chopped their forecasts yet again. Now the Bank of Canada says economic growth in this country is atrocious and requires, quote, considerable monetary stimulus to avoid falling back into recession. Will the Finance Minister do what his own department says is the most cost-effective thing to drive immediate growth, and that's invest in more municipal infrastructure right now? Will he do that?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Governor's comments related to the impact of oil, the drop in oil on the oil industry and the economy, yet the Liberals are advocating policies that would deliberately weaken the Canadian oil economy. Under our government, we have the strongest job record in the entire G7, and in respect to infrastructure, we have the largest and longest infrastructure program in the history of Canada, $75 billion over the next 10 years, $53 billion to the provinces and municipalities. We're very proud of what we're doing in this field.
The honourable member for West Canada.
With a great big $5 billion hole in it right now. They live in a time warp over there, Mr. Speaker. The jobs they brag about were 3 and 4 and 5 years ago, not recently. Last year, new jobs were barely 121,000. That was down 3.5% from the year before, and the year before was down 60% from the year before that. They're steadily creating fewer jobs, not more, and they're going in exactly the opposite direction from the Bank of Canada. Will the minister stop undermining Governor Polo's and reinvest in municipal infrastructure right now?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
It seems that the member opposite doesn't listen very well. We talked about the largest and longest infrastructure program in the history of Canada, much more than the Liberals even thought about. This is a party that believes that increasing taxes, increasing expenditures is the road to growth. In fact, it's the road to economic decline. We do not take any lessons from the Liberals, who created a $40 billion slush fund and now want to introduce a carbon tax, a tax on everything, which will kill jobs and undermine our economy.
The Honourable Member for Alfred Pellant. The Conservatives' Bill C-51 shows their obsession with espionage, especially when we talk about activists who don't share their ideology. In fact, groups of veterans, First Nations groups who've met, and doctors who met as a day of action on refugees are already under surveillance by this government as a threat to national security. C-51 will make the Conservatives' job even easier. Why is the minister so bent on spying on these legal activities undertaken by Canadians? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I have confidence in the committee that will bring reasonable amendments to the bill to improve it, to ensure that Canadians are protected. Mr. Speaker, allow me to quote the former judge from the Supreme Court, John Major, who said that had it not been through adequate sharing of information, the Air India tragedy could have been prevented if there had been a better exchange of information. Now, Mr. Speaker, all protests are excluded when it comes to the sharing of information. The Honourable Member for Alfred Pellant. Many witnesses at the committee talked about scrapping the bill, proposing amendment, and getting back to the drawing board. So I hope that the Conservatives are going to do the right thing and to support the NDP's amendments on this. Agencies, intelligence agencies, are stepping up the number of reports they produce. Between May and February 2014 and February 2015, the government received 160 reports on illegal activities. Now, none of these activities, or almost none, represent a risk for national security, and Bill C-51 won't help. Why is the minister wasting taxpayers' money on monitoring activities of groups that represent no danger to national security? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Operations Centre, the Government Operations Centre, plays a crucial role because it monitors events that may have disastrous consequences, such as earthquakes, fires, etc. It was set up in 2004, and it coordinates all operations for the government. Now, clearly, Bill C-51 does not cover those activities, but I'd like to invite my colleague to avoid using those kinds of excuses for not putting in place effective means for protecting Canadians.
Well, the Conservatives may want to appear like they've been listening when it comes to C-51, but the 3 weak amendments they've had to bring forward to their own bill don't even come close to dealing with its fundamental flaws. C-51 is still dangerously vague and overreaching, and it still ignores proven measures that work to combat terrorism. When Canadians hear that security services are monitoring protesting veterans and disability advocates, they're right to wonder whether it makes any sense to give these agencies wider powers with no new oversight. Why does the minister continue to insist that more oversight isn't needed when it clearly is?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
It's amazing to see, Mr. Speaker, the NDP using excuses not to support a bill that has common sense measures to protect Canadians against the terrorist threat we're facing. A terrorist threat we've seen here in Ottawa, we've seen in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, in Copenhagen, in Paris, in Sydney, Mr. Speaker. This is a serious matter, Mr. Speaker. I count on the committee to come up with good proposal and amendment that will strengthen the bill, strengthen our protection, our rights, Mr. Speaker, that will more importantly keep us safe from the terrorist threat we are facing now.
The Honourable Member for Esquimalt.
We're waiting for official reports on both those incidents in October. But it's not just C-51 where the Conservatives are falling short on protecting public safety. Global News investigators have raised questions about whether RCMP officers lack the tools and training needed to respond to the attack on RCMP members in New Brunswick, which cost 3 lives. The RCMP has been forced to reallocate resources and to move 600 officers from organized and financial crimes to respond to national security threats, a situation the RCMP Commissioner called unsustainable. Now the Conservatives are asking the RCMP to do even more while they cut their budget for a 3rd year in a row. Does the minister think this situation is acceptable?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, while we've increased the budget of our CMP by 1/3, we did not get the support of the opposition, Mr. Speaker. But let me tell you that keeping our streets and communities safe is our priority, Mr. Speaker, while training and procurement are matters that fall under the direct review of the RCMP. Our government supports Canada's law enforcement agencies with the legislative tools, such as C-51, which the NDP are not willing to give to our RCMP officer, and resources, Mr. Speaker. We will stand for the RCMP. Where is the NDP when talking of public safety and security, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Member for Bourg-en-Bresse-Berry. Here's another file bearing the brunt of Conservative incompetency. We've learned that Future Shop is closing 131 stores across the country. 1,500 people have been laid off. They're in addition to the thousands of people who've already lost their jobs on the Conservative watch. Many workers learned that they would have to find a new job when they got to work Saturday morning and when they found the store's doors locked. How can the Conservatives explain their lack of action to the families of the employees of Future Shop? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, clearly we will be supporting all employees affected by the decision by helping them to connect with available jobs. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, our economy has created more than 1.2 million net new jobs. 85% are full-time jobs, 2/3 are in well-paying industries, and it's thanks to the tax cuts that have helped build our economy. The NDP and the Liberals want to increase taxes. That will kill jobs and hurt Canadian families. We will not allow them to do that. The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Lebec. It's not just the job losses at Future Shop that are of concern. The President of the Bank of Canada painted a very somber picture of our economy. Economic results for the first quarter of 2015 are, and I quote, atrocious. Stephen Poloz is calling for the Conservatives to take action, but we're still waiting for the budget. And at the same time, a large Canadian bank is suspected of facilitating tax evasion in France. What are the Conservatives waiting for to kickstart the economy and fighting tax evasion? The Honourable Minister. Stay tuned for the budget.
That we will balance the budget, and we will introduce a budget which will benefit Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We have already introduced a plan which will benefit 4 million Canadian families right across this country. We've introduced a tax rebate which will benefit 90% of businesses, 780,000 businesses. Ours is a low-tax plan for jobs and growth, in contrast to the opposition, which would do the opposite. We will assure long-term prosperity for Canadians, and the budget will be part of that plan.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Lebec. Atrocious. Those are the words, that's the word, in fact, used by the Governor. That's the economic record, and Canada's economy is worsening. The President of the Bank of Canada cautioned the Conservatives unequivocally. The decline in oil prices may cascade quickly through the economy and into the labour market. The Minister of Finance is still missing on this. When will the minister leave his ivory tower and introduce a budget for the middle class? The Honourable Minister of Finance. As I've said on several occasions, a budget will not to come before April, and now I'll say stay tuned because it's coming soon. Mr. Speaker, what we're going to be doing is balance the budget and advance policies that will be beneficial for Canadians across the country.
Member for Parkdale High.
Well, let's try again, Mr. Speaker. Future Shops announced the permanent closure of 66 stores with another 1,500 jobs lost, adding to the tens of thousands of lost retail jobs under the Conservatives' watch.
Right.
And now, after record lows in job growth, the Governor of the Bank of Canada is describing our country's economic performance as atrocious.
Oh, man, atrocious.
Yet the Finance Minister continues to delay the budget. When will they listen to the Bank of Canada and take urgent action to create jobs and help the economy? When will they table the budget?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, ironically, the Governor of the Bank of Canada was commenting on the effects of low oil prices on the Canadian economy, which points to the fact that our natural resource sector is extremely important. The NDP's leader calls that sector a disease, and they, along with their Liberal friends, want to bring in a carbon tax that would decimate both that sector and many others right across the economy. Mr. Speaker, the last thing our economy and its workers need right now is gigantic new debt and taxes that the NDP and Liberals propose on them, Mr. Speaker. Instead, we're going to keep taxes low and creating jobs for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park.
The Bank of Canada says the situation is atrocious and Canadian families are paying the price. A new report says in Toronto alone, 12,000 public housing units will be uninhabitable within 8 years unless the government helps. The mayor said inaction has left cities like ours twisting in the wind. When will the Conservatives stop hiding and start doing their job? When will they finally introduce a budget and make the economy work for Canadian families?
Honourable Minister of State for Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to Canadian families, we've given them tax cuts and direct benefits. And Mr. Speaker, when it comes to housing, we have signed affordable housing agreements with every province across this country. We've made strong investments so that provinces can allocate the funding where they believe that housing is needed and in the way that it's needed. We've also invested in our homelessness partnering strategy. So whether it's cutting taxes for families, helping businesses, or helping provinces with housing needs, we're getting it done, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Laurent-Cartierville. Mr. Speaker, Commissioner Paulson said that 300 RCMP officers assigned to criminal investigations had to be transferred to fighting terrorism. If the RCMP is forced to choose among its vital responsibilities, it's because of the $195 million in cuts imposed by the Conservative government. Why is the minister denying the existence of this cut of $195.4 million when it's written black on white in Budget 2012, Table 1A.19, entitled Estimated Savings Public Safety Portfolio? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member, a colleague opposite, for having referred to a specific table. I'd like to give him the overall picture, if you will, of the situation. Since we took power, the Conservative government has increased the budget for police services for the RCMP by more than 33%. Mr. Speaker, the colleague, unfortunately, and his party, the Liberal Party, didn't support those increases. But I can tell you that we will continue to work to ensure that our police services have the resources they need to protect Canadians and to fulfill their mandate.
Member for Mount Peck. Mr. Speaker, a cut, the minister should know this, Mr. Speaker, a cut is not an increase. Cuts of $195 million and more since 2012 to the RCMP is not keeping Canadians safe. Right. Having to transfer hundreds of officers from criminal investigations to anti-terrorism is not keeping streets safe in this country. In fact, the rank-and-file RCMP officers came out this weekend put their jobs on the line to tell the Canadian public they feel betrayed by this government because they're not getting the funds for training. Why is this minister compromising public safety?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague, and it gives me an opportunity to remind those who are listening to us that this Conservative government has increased by 1/3 the financial resources for the RCMP. Why, Mr. Speaker? Because we believe it is important to make sure that they have the efficient resources, but not only the resources, but also the tools, especially when we are facing a terrorist threat, Mr. Speaker. And that's why here and abroad, this government is standing up for Canadians and protecting them. Thank you.
The honourable member for Malpeque.
Mr. Speaker, enough from this minister of the deception. The Global News program on the weekend cuts through the deception.
We've had similar instances where members don't use proper terms. There are proper cabinet ministerial titles. I'll ask members to keep to those as it leads to a lot less disorder. The honourable member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. My point is this government is good at deception but not good at talking about the facts. This weekend, the media reports show that the rank-and-file RCMP members are coming out, they're speaking out, they're feeling betrayed, they're not provided the resources for training or the resources for equipment they need to do their job. Simply put, why will this minister, why is he compromising public safety, and why is he...
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, let me tell this member and those who are listening to us that keeping our street and community safe is our priority, Mr. Speaker. And I'm proud to stand with a government, Mr. Speaker, who has done so much, not only to keep our streets safe, Mr. Speaker, but also to take care of victims, Mr. Speaker. We've done that by increasing our investment in our Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Mr. Speaker. We've entered in crime prevention, Mr. Speaker, and we also want to protect Canadians against the terrorist threat, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me tell you that this government is committed to ensure that the RCMP has the sufficient resource to keep Canadians safe. Thank you.
Member for Brossard-La Prairie.
Early Sunday morning, Air Canada Flight 624 crash-landed at Halifax International Airport. 25 passengers were injured, but luckily all are now safe and sound. Earlier reports indicate the plane touched down more than 300 meters short of the runway and smashed through antennas. Since 2010, the Transportation Safety Board has been sounding the alarm about runway overruns and the lack of tougher safety regulations. Can the minister tell us why the government has been dragging its feet?
Honourable Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we want to thank the flight crew. We want to thank the first responders who responded so effectively to this incident. That the passengers did indeed make it to safely in a timely manner. I would also say, Mr. Speaker, that I spoke with the chair of the Transportation Safety Board today. She indicated that they are taking the investigation very seriously. They are there on the ground in Halifax. Any updates and reports will, of course, come from them, as they are the ones in charge and the proper authority in this case and in this matter, and I look forward to getting the results from this investigation.
Honourable member for Brossard-La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, this disastrous landing could have been a terrible tragedy. Fortunately, all 133 passengers and crew members from Air Canada Flight 624 are safe and sound. The plane touched down about 300 meters before the runway and hit an antenna array. The accident raises many questions, especially since the Transportation Safety Board has been asking Transport Canada since 2010 to adopt tougher safety regulations to prevent landing accidents. Will the minister finally follow those recommendations from the TSB? Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, again, we are grateful that everybody involved in this incident, of course, are safe and sound. I also want to express my thanks once again to the first responders and to the flight attendants who ensured that the passengers were evacuated to safely. Finally, Mr. Speaker, this is truly within the domain of the Transportation Safety Board right now. They are undertaking the investigation and analyzing any factors that came into play. I look forward to their results.
Honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, grain producers will still have to bear the cost of Conservative mismanagement. We learned this weekend that the government will not renew the minimum transport requirement quotas for grain. These minimum requirements are important for producers, many of whom still can't empty their bins. How can the government justify that they're siding with the rail companies instead of protecting our farmers?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Actually, Mr. Speaker, with respect, the member is completely incorrect. Our government's action has actually worked in this case, and the amount of grain has moved significantly off the prairies. And again, grain is running at a rate that contributes to the strong economic growth that, of course, we had intended from the beginning. It has been a successful intervention. I'm grateful for the support from the Minister of Agriculture, who has done an excellent job with this file. And I'm grateful as well to the farmers in Canada and the rail companies as well, too, to ensure that we move this valuable commodity at the pace that we did in that crisis.
The member for Welland.
Mr. Speaker, I'd suggest the minister should try telling that to producer cars, shippers who are actually waiting for producer cars for the last couple of months. But, Mr. Speaker, the government's treatment of grain farmers has been nothing less than shameful. First, they waffled on the penalties, lowering the fines and giving the railways a pass for violating rules, and now they're going to not extend the minimum requirements. There are farmers who still have grain backlogs. There are producers who are still awaiting producer cars on the prairies, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a simple question. Why is the government so unwilling to stand up to the railways and defend Canadian farmers?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the OIC worked to get grain moving and reclaim Canada's export reputation as a reliable shipper. Western Canadian shipments from ports are 31% higher than last year and 25% higher than the 5-year average. CP and CN moved almost 50 million tons of grain under the OIC, 2.5 million tons over the mandated requirements. So carryout is projected to be within the normal average of 10 million tons.
Can't argue with facts.
The Honourable Member for Chatham, Kent Essex.
Mr. Speaker, today the Prime Minister is at the Honda Canada plant in Alliston, Ontario, where he announced for the first time Honda will be using one of its Canadian facilities to produce vehicles for export to Europe. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade share with the House why this announcement is so important for Ontario's automotive and advanced manufacturing sector, and indeed for all Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member from Chatham, Kent Essex. Mr. Speaker, today's announcement by Honda was made possible by the historic market access provided by the Canada-EU trade agreement, which is paving way for increased Canadian exports to the world's largest integrated market. This government's top priority is creating jobs and economic growth, which is why we have worked so hard to open new markets for Canadian companies and why we continue to support our exporters and manufacturers as part of the most ambitious pro-export, pro-jobs plan in Canadian history. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Argenteuil-Papineau Mirabel.
Minister for Aboriginal Affairs deeply offended First Nations leaders when he tried to cite an unsourced fact contradicted by the RCMP. Instead of attacking Indigenous people, the minister should bring people together to end the violence and finally call a national public inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. Will the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs stand up and apologize for his hurtful and thoughtless comments?
Bravo!
Mr. Speaker, as I did say last week, the week before I did a tour of the prairies and met with several First Nations and stakeholders to discuss a wide range of issues. And while I don't disclose specifics of closed-door meetings, I can assure all members that we had a productive discussion and that from what I got from many peoples outside of those meetings, I'm talking about chiefs and tribal council, is that they will indeed use the action plan to address the issues of missing and Aboriginal women.
Honourable Member for Argenteuil-Papineau Mirabel. The minister is backing himself into a corner by continuing to blame everyone and everything except his own inaction. Calls for him to step down are starting to get louder. Yesterday on Tout le monde en parle, we heard a moving plea from Laurie Ojik, the mother of Maisie, who disappeared over 6 years ago from the First Nations community of Kitigan-Zibi. Will the minister listen to her appeal for justice and for a national public inquiry?
member knows full well that we don't need a national inquiry. What we have is an action plan that the Minister tabled in September of last year. We will continue to work with communities to develop safety plans to raise awareness and take measures to empower Aboriginal women and girls. We're developing more community safety plans on and off reserves, including regions identified specifically by the RCMP. This action plan will engage men and boys, it'll raise awareness to break intergenerational cycles of violence, and, Mr. Speaker, it will address underlying causes of violence through structured training initiatives. We on this side of the House stand up for Aboriginal women and girls.
Tomorrow is the deadline for announcing greenhouse gas reduction targets before the Paris Conference on Climate Change. Mexico has already submitted its action plan. The United States, meanwhile, will officially unveil their commitments tomorrow. But, as usual, the Conservatives, well, they've announced that they don't have a plan. Why is this government once again playing catch-up? Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government is playing a constructive role in establishing new international climate change agreements that includes meaningful and transparent commitment from all major emitters. In line with the Lima Agreement, Canada is preparing its intended nationally determined contributions and is committed to submitting it well in advance of the COP21 December 2015 meetings. Because this is an international contribution, we are seeking information from the provinces and territories to understand how they intend to meet their targets and how their plans will factor into Canada's overall commitment. In the lead-up to Paris, we continue to take actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you, Mr.
The Honourable Member for Halifax.
The only thing the Conservatives are on target to meet is complete failure. Months
ago, this government agreed to a March 31st deadline for announcing national climate targets, but just like with the oil and gas regulations, this has become the latest in a long string of broken promises. Mexico has announced its plan. The U.S. is moving forward. When will we stop being international laggards on climate change? When will they release Canada's plan for reducing greenhouse gases?
Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, we welcome the announcement recently by the United States and Mexico on climate change, and we're very pleased to see that Mexico and the United States are undertaking efforts that emulate much of the work that Canada has done in partnership with the United States. Canada and the United States are successfully aligning regulations in several areas, including the vehicles and the HFCs. And at home, our government is reducing emissions while growing the economy, and we're doing this without the job-killing carbon tax the NDP and the Liberals will introduce. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Saint-Maurice-Champlain. Mr. Speaker, at the end of this year, Canada will participate in the 21st UN Climate Change Conference. According to data compiled by researchers in Canada, our country will be unable to respect its commitments and its deadline to submit its targets for greenhouse gas emissions. In this context, does the Prime Minister plan to commit the country to a new strategy to decrease or increase polluting emissions? Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I have stated, Canada is playing an constructive role in establishing new international climate change targets for Canada. In line with the Lima Agreement, Canada is preparing its intended nationally determined contribution and is committed to submitting this well in advance of COP21. And this is the work that we're continuing to do with the provinces and territories and seeking the information to understand how they intend to participate in meeting those targets and how that plan will factor in Canada's overall commitment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Full member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Mr. Speaker, the deadline for submitting Canada's next climate action program is to the UN is tomorrow. The Conservative government will not meet that deadline. The Petersburg Climate Dialogue will take place in May. The Conservative government will not attend. Chancellor Merkel plans to make climate change the #1 priority at the G7 meetings in June. The Prime Minister will try to obstruct those meetings. If deadlines are missed, meetings are skipped, and the G7 sabotaged, then why bother with a charade of COP21 in Paris?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've stated, we are in line with moving forward in establishing the targets for Canada. COP21 meetings does not take place until December 2015. Because this is because we have to work with the provinces and territories, we are seeking information from the provinces and the territories in terms of their plan and how that will contribute to Canada meeting its, developing its target. Our government is playing a constructive role in establishing new international climate change agreements that include meaningful and transparent commitments from
The Honourable Member for Louis-Hébert. Mr. Speaker, clearly there's been no progress on the Quebec Bridge file. The most recent study by consulting firm Rush has doubled the estimated cost of repainting the bridge. However, CN has refused to make the entire report public. When it comes to transparency, well, we've seen better. But while the Conservatives are busy making promises in Quebec City, in Montreal, the federal government is preparing to repaint the Jacques Cartier Bridge. Will the minister stand with the people of Quebec City and force CN to make the entire report public? Honourable Minister of Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, on this file, we are working in cooperation with the Mayor of Quebec City, Mr. Labaume, the Mayor of Lévis, the Government of Quebec, and when it comes to this bridge, we're also working with the owner, CN. We have respected our commitments. There's one thing that member has done for the bridge. He's organized a photo contest. While he was doing that, we committed a huge amount of money to the repainting of that bridge. The Honourable Member for Quebec. That's ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. We know very well that this minister is doing nothing at all for Quebec City. In Quebec City, we're still waiting for the bridge. We're still waiting for the bridge to be repainted. We've been waiting 7 years now for the Quebec City Armory to be rebuilt, and still nothing there. And we're still waiting to know if the government will fund the Tall Ships 2017 event in Quebec City. So will the minister finally take the interests of the people of Quebec City to heart and do his job? Honourable Minister for Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, it's with great pleasure that I have been working in the Quebec City region because since the last election, those members haven't been doing much of anything. We're working for all people of Quebec, all the regions of Quebec and Canada. We will continue to do our job, Mr. Speaker, and it's very important for us to respect jurisdiction. We're working with our municipal provincial partners. In Ottawa, Mr. Speaker, we're doing our job.
The Honourable Member for Desnethé, Mississippi-Churchill River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some Canadians choose to have family members care for their young children. This important group deserves support. But the NDP child care plan would do absolutely nothing for them. It would not provide these families with a single dime that they can use to care for their children. And that's shameful, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister of State of Social Development please update this House on how our Conservative government plan will help every Canadian family?
The Honourable Minister of State for Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, that member is right. What Canadian families are looking for are options and choice when it comes to child care. Mr. Speaker, some families use other family members to help care for their children. Some use regulated daycare spaces. Some use private daycare. And some families make that sacrifice and one parent will stay home. Our plan supports every single family with children because we trust them with their decision making. The opposition, Mr. Speaker, the NDP would only help 10%. The Liberals have no plan for families. We'll trust families. We'll continue to put money in the pockets of Canadian families so they can make choices best for them.
Honourable Member for Vancouver Centre.
Mr. Speaker, 1 year after the expiry of the 2004 Health Accord, doctors for Medicare and other health advocates are on the Hill with thousands of petitions from Canadians concerned for the future of Medicare. In 2004, as Leader of the Opposition, this Prime Minister supported the Accord and vowed, I quote, "We must ensure governments live up to their commitments made in the Health Accord." Yet, his government abandoned the agreement, refuses to meet premiums, and changed health transfers to per capita, jeopardizing provinces' ability to provide basic services. Why did he break his promise and put the future of Medicare at risk?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is entirely untrue because, Mr. Speaker, under the late Jim Flaherty, it was announced that we would, of course, continue funding health care for the next 10 years. And we are now at the highest recorded health transfers in Canadian history. Since forming government, health transfers have increased by almost 70%, and record funding is going to reach $40 billion annually. And most importantly, Mr. Speaker, every single year we will see an increase in health spending.
The Honourable Member for St. John's South North.
A fisheries delegation from Newfoundland and Labrador is in Ottawa today to talk about the Conservatives' mismanagement of northern shrimp. Unfortunately, the Fisheries Committee is not slated to meet with them, and there's no sign of the Conservatives correcting their course. Coastal communities should be able to benefit from the resources off their shores, but the Conservatives have not committed to upholding the principle of adjacency when it comes to northern shrimp. Mr. Speaker, why does the minister continue to ignore Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who depend on healthy, local fisheries?
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to fish harvesting decision, we always look for the right balance between maximizing economic opportunities for fishermen and ensuring sustainable fisheries. As announced by the Minister of Fisheries today, this year's science supports a rollover of total allowable catch in most shrimp fishing areas with a modest increase in Area 5. This means that all fishermen currently involved in the northern shrimp fishery will be out fishing this upcoming season.
The Honourable Member for Brandon Souris.
Speaker, farmers know that one of the most useful short-term loan programs that they have is the Advanced Payment Program. The program provides all farmers, whether they're grain or oilseed, livestock or horticulture businesses, Mr. Speaker, the ability to borrow $400,000 from the federal government and up to $100,000 of that being interest-free on an annual basis. These dollars are used to cover the production costs before crops get an opportunity to go to market. And so I'd like to ask the Parliamentary Secretary for Agriculture to please inform the House and farmers what the government is doing to improve this program.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary and Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, today the Minister of Agriculture announced that as of April 1st, our government is improving the Advanced Payments Program. Farmers can now get multi-year loan arrangements, use new security to guarantee the loan, and repay it with cash on hand. It is easier for farmers in a cooperative or who have incorporated to access the program. We have removed the monopolies of the program administrators, and now they have to compete for farmers' business with lower rates and advances suited to the needs of the farmer. This is another example of our government creating the conditions for economic growth and prosperity in Canada.
Member for Edmonton, St. Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight this House will vote on extending our commitment to degrade ISIL until March 30th, 2016. Now, I want to support this motion, but I'm having a difficult time seeing positive outcomes for the well-intentioned goal of degrading ISIL. In fact, the U.S. is worried that Shia militias will retaliate against Sunni civilians if occupied territories are recovered from ISIS. CIA operatives believe that the real threat in the region is not ISIS, it's the Shia militia that wants to replace ISIS. Now, assuming that ISIL can be degraded, does the government believe that that will lead to more or less stability in the region?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, degrading the genocidal, fanatical terrorist organization of the so-called Islamic State will be helpful to regional security, which is why every single country in the region is involved in the military operation against ISIS, as why 60 countries are supporting the overall Allied coalition, while 24 of them, including, and by the way, while all 28 NATO countries are supporting the operation in one shape or form against ISIL. Yes, they are, according to the Secretary General of NATO.
Member for Edmonton, St. Albert.
Mr. Speaker, last October 22nd, moments before he murdered an unarmed Sentry Guard and then stormed into this very centre block,
An armed terrorist recorded a video confirming that his actions were in retaliation for Canada's involvement in Afghanistan and our then recent decision to deploy the RCIF to Iraq. Now, given the increasingly complex quagmire in Iraq and Syria, and therefore the dubious nature of long-term positive outcomes, is the government not concerned that by extending our modest commitment for another 12 months, an unfortunate consequence could very well be more retaliatory attacks on Canadian soil?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Speaker, the honourable member alluded to this at the beginning. These jihadists have declared war on Canada. They have urged their supporters to, quote, attack disbelieving Canadians in any manner and have vowed that we should not even feel secure even in our own homes. If the honourable member is looking for a reason to support this motion, I would suggest to him because it's the right thing to do. He should support it.
The Honourable Member for Avalon.
Mr. Speaker, in 2013, the Conservative government dismantled the Office of Commission of Review Tribunal and replaced it with the Social Security Tribunal. A number of files were transferred from the OCRT to the SST. My office has some files going back to 2012, which still have not been resolved. Many gravely ill Canadians have been denied speedy hearings and still waiting to have their appeals heard. This is unacceptable. The Minister promised to wipe out the backlog by this summer. Can he provide an update on his spike unit and what is the impact it's having on eliminating the backlog?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
For his question, we consider the backlog to be completely unacceptable. That is precisely why my predecessor came up with a common sense plan to triage the backlog within the department. That is to say, to treat the cases that have been around for a long time by settling them before they even have to go before the tribunal. I can report to the House that my officials advise that we are on track to eliminate the backlog and that our officials within the department are making great progress towards that goal.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister for Public Safety earlier in this question period completely mischaracterized the evidence of former Justice John Major, who headed the Air India inquiry. Justice John Major made it abundantly clear to the Public Safety Committee that he does not find the information sharing provisions in Bill C-51 adequate at all. If he said it once, he said it a dozen times. You need oversight at the back end. You need to have a national security advisor. The Justice John Major said that it was human nature to withhold information between agencies. The bill needs fixing. Will the minister fix it?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, as I've indicated, our government is open to reasonable amendments to improve the C-51 bill and to ensure that it protects Canadians while protecting their rights and freedoms. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to oversight, Canada can be proud of its oversight model. There are a number of provisions in the bill that will reinforce the oversight and mechanisms, and I invite my colleague to read Article 4 of the bill, which gives extended power to the Oversight Committee.
Concludes question period for today. I am honoured to recognize His Excellency Kevin Vickers, Canada's Ambassador to Ireland and former Sergeant-at-Arms, who is joining us today in the Speaker's Gallery. For nearly a decade, Mr. Vickers' presence resonated throughout the parliamentary precinct. He joined us in 2005 as Director of Security Services after a distinguished career with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. A year later, he was appointed the 9th Sergeant-at-Arms of the House of Commons. As Sergeant-at-Arms, he expanded on his security leadership role, taking on new challenges, including leading the long-term vision and plan for the House of Commons, strengthening partnerships with key organizations, and improving service delivery to members. Veuillez vous joindre.
Please join with us in expressing our recognition and wishing him every success in the next interesting step in his distinguished career.
Tabling of documents, dépôt de documents. The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 36.8, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 51 petitions.
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to subsection
For Pierre Fondolard. In April, I visited Gerald Godin's CEGEP, and I was surprised to meet so many students interested in political issues like Bill C-51 or the East-West pipeline.
Abbott College. The leader of the official opposition was visiting the college as he accepted the invitation from the student union. Thank you to SUJAC for organizing this political discussion and for facilitating this meeting between students and politicians. This visit reminded me that, contrary to what we often hear, youth are not only interested about politics and social issues, but they are also engaged and want to take concrete actions to incite change.
When Conservative ministers claim that they know what's good for young people when they cut future programs for pensions, or when they say that problems that they are closing their eyes to now will be dealt with by future generations, well, I turn towards the students of Gerald Godin and John Abbott, and I hope that things change in this Parliament. The NDP is right to elect young people and to entrust to them important dossiers and important responsibilities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Prince Edward Hastings.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what a family. Today I wish to pay tribute to the Crawfords, a prolific Canadian hockey family from my riding of Prince Edward Hastings. Floyd Crawford is one of Belleville's most legendary hockey heroes. He was part of the Belleville-McFarland team that won gold while representing Canada at the World Hockey Championships in 1959. Three of their children, Bobby, Mark, and Lou, went on to play in the National Hockey League. The patriarch Floyd is an Allen Cup and world champion. Mark Crawford, after an NHL career as a player, became a coach and led the Colorado Avalanche to a Stanley Cup win in 1996. Bobby had a playing career with the Hartford Whalers, and Lou, after a brief NHL career, also became a coach and later stood behind the bench for the Belleville Bulls. I'm told the Crawford name is on more hockey championship trophies than any other name. Altogether, this family of 9 successful competitive children has left an incredible stamp, not only on the hockey world in Belleville, but as tremendous ambassadors for Canada. Mr. Speaker, their family, their community, and their country. Floyd, Pauline, and the entire Crawford family, thank you.
The Honourable Member for Trinity Spadina.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to remember Jonathan Crombie, known to many as the actor who played Gilbert Blythe on the acclaimed TV series Anne of Green Gables. Jonathan Crombie also performed at the Stratford Festival and on Broadway. Jonathan Crombie is also the son of former Cabinet Minister and Member of Parliament David Crombie, who of course was also Mayor of Toronto. My father served on council at the same time, and I first met Jonathan during a royal visit to Toronto with the children of all the city councillors looking out over the square as the councillors greeted the Queen. All of us, of course, except for one. Jonathan was at play in the outer offices drawing some of the most appalling and mischievous pictures I've ever seen, each one funnier than the last. Each picture was pinned on the wall of an unsuspecting staff member when they returned from the square. The Queen may have been visiting, but Jonathan took center stage. His talent, charm, and wit made him a successful actor, and those are the characteristics that his family now misses, as Jonathan passed away in New York City this month. And while his acting lives on with TV and film appearances, through the gift of life, Jonathan also now lives on in the lives of others. To his family, our condolences, and for his gifts to us all, we're truly thankful and remember him well.
The Honourable Member for Souris Moose Mountain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize 4 of my constituents who were presented with prestigious awards at the 2015 Estevan Bruins Sportsman Dinner on April 16, 2015. The Sportsman Dinner is an annual fundraiser organized by the Estevan Bruins hockey team and is the largest fundraiser for the team. Anthony Maley, a championship golfer, and Oriole Bill, an accomplished water polo player, received the Boston Pizza Estevan and District Male and Female Athlete of the Year awards. Jace Carlisle took home the Kim Anderson Award for the top junior official, while Chad Chapman received the Estevan Kinsman Club Volunteer Coach of the Year Award for his coaching in female hockey. As Member of Parliament for Souris Moose Mountain, I'd like to congratulate all award recipients, as well as the volunteers, the many who came together to make this great event happen. Congratulations.
The Honourable Member for Honoré Mercier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Saturday, April 18th, I had an opportunity to celebrate the Cambodian New Year in Tamikaran Pagoda in Rivière-des-Prairies. And there I had an opportunity to meet with the two gentlemen who gave me a detailed account of how their lives were spared by two magnificent sisters who brought them to Canada when they were orphaned during the years when Cambodia and Vietnam were at war. These heroes are Eloise and Anne Charret, who, aged 20 and 22 at the time, risked their lives to save 55 babies and children. Now, that heroic act took place 40 years ago, and we must all pay tribute to these women on behalf of the Cambodian and Vietnamese communities and on behalf of all people who believe in humanitarian assistance as a selfless act at the risk of one's own life. Thank you, Eloise and Anne Charret, for your heroism and your love. Today, these children are your children as well. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, as Canadians know, our Conservative government recently announced expansion and enhancements to the very popular universal child care benefit. This benefit used to apply only to children under 6 and provided $100 per month per child. Now, Canadian families with children under 6 will receive $160 per month per child, and Canadian families with children between ages of 6 and 17 will now receive $60 per month per child. This amounts to $1,920 per year for each child under 6 and $720 per year for each child between 6 and 17. However, there are 200,000 eligible families in Canada who have not applied, including in my city of Edmonton, 9,834 families representing 16,617 children. May 1st, 2015 is the deadline to apply for these benefits in order to begin receiving them in July 2015. Please visit esdc.gc.ca and click on the Enhanced Universal Child Care Benefit Apply Now feature to begin the application process. Mr. Speaker, this is how we're helping the best child care providers, mom and dad, raise their kids their way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, last week I was privileged to travel to Yerevan to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. While in Armenia, I had the opportunity to speak at the Global Forum Against the Crime of Genocide, attend the canonization ceremony of the victims of genocide, and place flowers at the memorial. Although a century has passed, the horror of the Armenian Genocide remains fresh in our minds, and we continue to give voice to those silenced by this tragedy. Many of today's Armenian Canadians trace their roots back to the survivors of the events of 1915, who, at the time of crisis, sought the opportunity to build a new life for themselves and for their families here in Canada. The Armenian Canadian community has made and continues to make a rich and vibrant contribution to Canada's multicultural society. As chair of the Canada-Armenia Parliamentary Friendship Group, and on behalf of all members of this House, we will continue to remember the events of 1915 and work together to safeguard human rights and dignity for all. Thank you, Mr.
Honourable Member for Hamilton Mountain.
When the Finance Minister delivered his budget, his goal was never to provide fiscal accountability. Rather, it was to launch an election campaign that would buy votes with small, targeted tax breaks to the Conservative voting base, paid for with money from the rest of us. Fortunately, Canadians are not so easily duped. Economists immediately pointed out that Canadians with higher incomes are the big winners in this budget. Social justice activists noticed that poverty wasn't even mentioned. Neither was climate change. And once again, the EI Fund was raided to pay for Conservative election promises rather than helping laid-off workers. Others pointed out that this was a balanced budget built on sand, created with Finance Department pixie dust. It was one of the riskiest budgets in recent memory. Even the Finance Minister acknowledged that his spending was not sustainable, but he simply shrugged it off by saying he would leave that to the Prime Minister's granddaughter to solve. I was shocked. I don't want my granddaughter to be responsible for picking up the mess that the Conservatives are intentionally leaving behind. Stella deserves better, and Canadians deserve better. This October, they will get better by electing an NDP government.
The Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to pay tribute to my constituent, veteran Art Boone, who stormed the beaches of Normandy with Allied forces on D-Day in 1944 and went on to help liberate the Netherlands from Nazi occupation. Art has been officially invited by the government of the Netherlands to attend commemorative ceremonies in Europe to mark the 70th anniversary of the liberation. Art wants to accept this honor and have his son Rick, a teacher, with him at his side as he receives a hero's welcome in the Netherlands. But the Avon-Maitland District School Board is refusing to allow Rick Boone unpaid leave to attend. This is a travesty. Our government strongly condemns this decision and calls on the Avon-Maitland District School Board to allow Rick Boone to travel with his father to be honored. This is about respect for veterans and their families, and our Conservative government stands firmly behind the Boone family.
The Honourable Member for La Salle-Mar. Mr. Speaker, last Friday I attended the Eco-Citizenship and Biodiversity Conference organized by the Southwest Eco-Quartier. In attendance were the Friends of Parc Grignon and the Friends of Parc Saint-Paul. After that, I visited a photo exhibit put on by the Friends of Parc des Rapides in conjunction with Héritage Laurentien at the Usine Sim de la Salle School. On Saturdays, some 20 volunteers braved the cold to participate in my spring cleanup activity, where we gathered up 8 metric cubes of waste. It was in conjunction with Eco-Quartier de l'Arrondissement du Sud-Ouest. All of these initiatives show that the people of La Salle-Mar are, like me, concerned about protecting the environment and keeping Canada green.
The Honourable Member for Langley.
Regarding crime violence, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to be part of a Conservative government that's taking strong action to keep British Columbians safe. We passed tough new laws to clean up our streets and put criminal gang members behind the bars where they belong. We passed over 30 new tough measures on crime, including new prison sentences for drive-by shootings. Shockingly, the Liberals and the NDP voted against these common sense measures. We've also made significant investments in the RCMP to ensure that there are enough front-line police officers in our communities. Contrast this with the previous Liberal government, who actually closed down the RCMP training depot because they didn't want to pay for the new recruits. That's absolutely disgraceful. Mr. Speaker, people in my riding know it's only this Conservative government led by this Prime Minister that can be trusted to keep Canadians safe.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver Quadra.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are shocked and saddened by the magnitude of devastation from the earthquake that hit Nepal and surrounding areas. Early reports indicated that the death toll is very high and survivors continue to be trapped in the rubble. I'm pleased to see Canada has sent DART, our specialized military disaster assistance response team, to Nepal, along with sorely needed supplies. I note British Columbia has also sent emergency responder teams to the area. Thank you. I ask the government to commit to provide rebuilding assistance once the search and rescue mission has concluded. It is at times like this that all Canadians can see the benefit of our armed forces having the ability and capacity to respond in a timely fashion and come to the aid of those who need it the most. I believe I speak for all Canadians as we extend our deepest sympathy to those who have lost someone in this tragedy, and we offer our hope that Canada's contribution to this relief effort will result in saving many lives. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Lotbinière, Chutes-de-la-Chaudière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with a great deal of emotion that I rise to pay tribute to Senator the Honourable Pierre-Claude Nolan and to offer my condolences to his loved ones and all those who had the privilege of working alongside him or being his friend. The Canadian Federation has lost a man of great wisdom with a reading and understanding of life that enabled him to hold one of the most prestigious positions, Speaker of the Senate. The Honourable Pierre-Claude Nolan was a man of integrity and exemplary standing. His courage and his convictions won many a person over. For me personally, His qualities as an exceptional man are a reflection of what all parliamentarians hope to leave as a legacy to our great country. I'm thinking, among other things, of his unwavering courage, his honesty, and his authenticity. The contribution of Pierre-Claude Nolan cannot be summed up in a minute. I offer my condolences to his wife Camille, his children, Simon, Louis, and Virginie, as well as to his family and loved ones. We will honor his memory, and we will long remember him. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals tabled the motion to denounce the Conservatives' partisan advertising paid out of Liberal funds. The Liberals are saying, and I quote, "This is an affront to taxpayers who work hard and expect the government, that the government will treat their money with respect." End of quote. Wow. I must be dreaming here. The Liberals, who are trying to lecture the Conservatives about partisan advertising and are claiming to defend taxpayers? That's like putting Colonel Sanders in charge of the chicken coop. Have they already forgotten about the sponsorship scandal? Have they already forgotten about all that partisan spending at the expense of taxpayers? And they're trying to, I think, in fact, they could teach the Conservatives a few tricks in this regard. Einstein said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Fortunately, Canadians and Quebecers are no fools. Next October, by voting NDP, they will finally see and obtain different results.
Our government makes no apologies for ensuring middle-class Canadians are aware of the measures that put more money back into their pockets.
That's
For
right.
example, we want Canadians to know about the new family tax cut and enhanced universal child care benefit, which will benefit 100% of families with kids. The vast majority of these benefits going to low and middle income families. But the Liberals and the NDP do not want Canadians to know about these benefits.
Shame.
Why? Because they want high taxes on middle class families, high taxes on middle class seniors, and high taxes on middle class consumers. That's their plan for the middle class. In contrast, our government's plan is all about reducing taxes for the middle class and for all Canadians.
Oral questions. Questions orales. L'honorable député de Laurier.
The honourable member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, our thoughts and prayers are with all of the families who were affected by the earthquake in Nepal over the weekend. Whereas the international community is mobilizing to provide humanitarian assistance, Canada has a very important role to play. Is the government ready to match the amounts donated by all Canadians to the various organizations on the ground, as they have done in the past?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, our thoughts and prayers are with those affected by the disaster that occurred. But I was pleased, Mr. Speaker, to announce today that there will be a matching fund. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, we've been stepping up very, very fast in this situation with an initial $5 million in humanitarian aid. And then today I'm announcing officially that there will be a matching fund. So Canadians should be proud of that. They are generous and they will be able to participate with the government to make sure that we help Nepalese to recover, to be ready to recover.
The honourable member for Halifax.
Mr. Speaker, as the death toll this weekend's devastating earthquake in Nepal continues to rise, our hearts go out to all of those affected. Can the government give us a further update on the relief that Canada has offered so far and on the assistance that's being provided to Canadians who are caught in this disaster?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I just mentioned, we had first of all an initial response with $5 million announced last weekend in the humanitarian aid. And then this contribution, of course, will help to provide safe drinking water and food to those in need and provide medical supplies and shelter. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, I just announced that now we established a matching fund After that, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to monitor and to take actions necessary to assist in this crisis, and we will deploy soon, Mr. Speaker, the emergency stockpile from our storage facility. So we are monitoring the situation to make sure that the supply.
The honourable member for Halifax.
Mr. Speaker, in his last budget, the Minister of Finance decided to hand the bill for regressive measures to our grandchildren. He's not attacking the biggest economic, social, and ecological debt. The Conservative government is leaving it to future generations. Why did the minister table a budget that is clearly to the benefit of the wealthy, rather than putting forward measures that would help families of the middle class? Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, the NDP think that people gaining less than $60,000 a year are too wealthy, because almost 2/3 of the people who maxed out their TFSA accounts earn less than $60,000 a year. We are going to allow them to save even more without having to pay taxes on the interest. The NDP want to increase taxes on these people, and we are not going to allow them to do so.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians will be paying for Conservative handouts to the wealthy for generations to come. And adding insult to injury, Conservatives are actually going to spend $13.5 million of our money for ads on their bad idea. Today, the PBO confirmed that Conservatives will give billions to the wealthy while leaving middle-class Canadians falling further and further behind. These latest Conservative handouts will cost tens of billions of dollars this year. And get this, the doubling of the TFSA will give the wealthiest 20% twice as much as all other Canadians combined. With so many families struggling to find affordable childcare and looking for work, why are the Conservatives so fixated on helping out the wealthy?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP thinks that people who earn less than $60,000 a year are wealthy, and that is what they're suggesting. The people who will benefit from the increased contribution limit of the tax-free savings accounts are those who've already maxed it out. 2/3 of them earn less than $60,000 a year. Maybe they had a small inheritance from a deceased family member. Maybe they are required to take the money out of their RSP or RIF and therefore looking for a place to shelter it from the hands of government. Mr. Speaker, the only way they'll be able to do that is by re-electing a Conservative government, because the NDP would tax that money away.
The Honourable Member for Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
The Finance Minister has already admitted that our grandkids will pay for his handouts to the wealthy. The Conservative proposal to double the TFSA limit is a scheme that overwhelmingly rewards the wealthy. It's kind of like some perverse Robin Hood tax going on. According to the PBO, the wealthiest Canadians will get almost 10 times more than the entire middle class combined. That leaves middle class families working harder than ever to make ends meet while having to pay for this latest Conservative handout. Why are Conservatives actually spending $13.5 million advertising handouts for the wealthy, yet refuse to invest even one single dollar in creating childcare spaces for everybody else?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, let me quote from the Finance Department of Canada. About 60% of the individuals contributing the maximum amount to their tax-free savings accounts had incomes of less than $60,000 a year in 2013, Mr. Speaker. That's on page 235. The NDP wants to raise taxes on people earning less than $60,000 a year, Mr. Speaker. That is exactly the wrong thing to do for our families. They want to take away the universal child care benefit and raise taxes on families, Mr. Speaker. We won't let them do that.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa South.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is telling Canadians to be frugal on the one hand while wasting $750 million on partisan ads on the other. They prefer spending hundreds of millions of dollars in self-promotion rather than helping the middle class, creating jobs, and growing the economy. Will the Prime Minister commit today to put an end to this waste and submit all of this advertising to a third party for verification and before it is published. The Honourable Minister of Employment. Mr. Speaker, we are informing families about tax decreases and benefits that we're giving them. Let's start with taxes. We are implementing a tax cut for families that will allow couples to split their income up to $50,000 a year, and we're increasing the universal child care benefit up to $2,000 for every child under the age of 6, and also for children between 6 and 17. People need to know that these benefits exist. The Liberals want to take those benefits away and increase taxes.
Mr. Speaker, what the Liberals don't want is $29 million on 9,800 billboards. That's what they don't want. Neither do Canadians, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister cynically preaches restraint, yet he spent more than $750 million on ineffective and wasteful partisan advertising. He'd rather spend hundreds of millions of dollars on self-promoting advertising instead of helping the middle class, creating jobs and growth in our economy. Here's his opportunity. Will he commit today to ending this wasteful abuse of tax dollars and submit all advertising to a third-party review process for vetting ahead of their release?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, now that the Prime Minister has balanced the government's budget, he can help families balance their budgets. He's brought in the family tax cut, which will allow parents to split their income to save up to $2,000 a year. He's increasing the universal child care benefit to $2,000 for kids under 6 and $720 for kids 6 through 17. Unfortunately, there are 200,000 families who have not signed up for that enhanced universal child care benefit. They have until the deadline of Friday to sign up to get that July lump sum payment. The Liberals don't want those parents to get any of that money. In fact, the Liberals would take it all away, and that's why they're against us informing families that those benefits exist.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa South.
Mr. Speaker, on the weekend, the Finance Minister admitted that he has no idea how many jobs his budget will create. No idea. When challenged that the TFSA change will cost billions of dollars and create no new jobs, the Finance Minister says that this is a problem that the Prime Minister's granddaughter can worry about. Well, Canadians are worried about jobs right now. Where is the Minister's plan for jobs and growth for the middle class and those working so very hard to join it?
The Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member knows that the strong leadership of this Conservative government has steered Canada out of the global economic recession and created 1.2 million net new jobs. The budget is full of new measures to create more new jobs, measures like reducing the small business tax rate, providing support to provinces to harmonize apprenticeship training, promoting Blue Seal certification, fostering training in response to employers' needs. Mr. Speaker, we know that the Liberals want high taxes on the middle class. We know that would kill jobs and set working families back. Mr. Speaker, Canadians know they're better off with this Conservative government.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, evidence in the trial of former Conservative Senator Mike Duffy has given rise to new questions about the Prime Minister's office and its involvement in unreported lobbying and communications between Mike Duffy and Enbridge executives. Mr. Speaker, why did the Prime Minister ask Mike Duffy to send him a note on, I quote, Enbridge Line 9 problems on February 17, 2012, and what was contained in the note Mr. Duffy sent to the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and Enbridge executives on February 20th of that year?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, obviously I completely reject the premise of the question, and I'm not going to comment on matters that are in front of the court, Mr. Speaker. But this member could help me and could help Canadians recover the $2.7 million that the NDP owe them for illegal offices, Mr. Speaker. That's $2.7 million that 68 members of the NDP caucus owe the Canadian taxpayers back. And I actually haven't even gotten into the $1.1 million they owe for illegal advertising as well, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps in a supplementary we can talk about that.
Order. Members need to come to order while other members have the floor. The
Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île.
La Pointe de l'Île.
The Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île. We know now that former Senator Mike Duffy seems not to have been appointed only to make and amend legislation. His discussions with the Prime Minister's entourage and oil companies were also part of his duties. His diary refers directly to discussions with the Prime Minister about the Enbridge Company projects. Did the Prime Minister, or can the Prime Minister confirm that he had these conversations with Mike Duffy in April 2012? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I reject the premise of the question. There's another very important question, Mr. Speaker. There are 68 members of the NDP who used this House's resources against the rules. And this particular member organized $25,000 worth of work against the rules of this House, and I hope that she's going to do the right thing and reimburse this $25,000 and more to taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, budgets are a question of choices, and the Conservatives have chosen not to help families save for their retirement, to not help the unemployed find jobs. The Minister of Finance himself does not even know how many jobs his budget will create. Why do the Conservatives not invest in measures that will create jobs for the middle class rather than favoring the wealthy? The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, we have created jobs by decreasing taxes on small and medium-sized businesses. This will allow them to hire more people, while at the same time the program is training more than 500,000 apprentices. And all of these measures help to create jobs, particularly for our young people. The NDP want to increase taxes, including taxes on small and medium-sized businesses, to pay for the great cost of bureaucracy, and will prevent them from doing so.
Well, rather than skipping over the facts, Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister is sure his budget will leave an economic burden on future generations while rewarding the wealthiest with billions in new handouts. But he has no idea whether it will create any jobs. 1.3 million Canadians are looking for work. They were looking for some help to find a good job so they can support their family and save for their retirement. But the Conservatives left them hanging. Why is giving billions to the wealthy a higher priority than creating good jobs for Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, our program for jobs is tax cuts, training, and trade. On tax cuts, we're reducing the small business tax rate from 11 to 9%. That will free up more money for small business owners to hire people in their community. And on training, we have given out 500,000 apprenticeship grants that prepares the electricians, plumbers, carpenters, and others for the high-paying, in-demand jobs of the future. And free trade with Europe will create 80,000 net new jobs. The NDP opposes all three of those steps.
The Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park.
Well, the facts. The Finance Minister has no idea how many jobs his budget will create in Canada. But we do know that the Conservatives are helping to create jobs in Mexico. Export Development Canada announced it would loan Volkswagen $526 million without any guarantee of Canadian jobs. The Conservatives have failed the auto sector and have lost more than 400,000 good manufacturing jobs. How can they possibly justify investing in jobs in Mexico while 1.3 million Canadians are out of work?
The Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
Speaker, as a result of our government's actions since we were first elected, Canada has the strongest job creation record in the entire G7. Economic Action Plan 2015 will help create even more jobs, reducing the small business tax rate, ensuring training reflects labour market needs, investing in federal infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, we know that with all these measures, the NDP and the Liberal Party would only reverse the measures that would create jobs. They would increase tax rates. They would put a higher tax on the middle-class Canadians, Mr. Speaker. We won't let that happen.
The Honourable Member for Beauharnois-Salaberry. Mr. Speaker, I want to remind people that the manufacturing sector has lost 400,000 jobs because of the Conservatives. Last fall, the Conservatives were saying that it was too expensive to help Ford create 1,000 jobs in Windsor. And yet they found $525 million to help Volkswagen create jobs in Mexico. Why does the Conservative budget have millions of dollars to move jobs to Mexico and nothing to create jobs for the middle class here in Canada? Minister.
From the truth. This agreement with VW will create jobs and opportunities for Canadian manufacturers by providing them with access to supply chains of a large multinational company. Mr. Speaker, they're already doing lots of business in Canada, selling to domestic auto manufacturers. We want to open the world to our auto products manufacturers. On this side of the House, we believe in supporting our Canadian manufacturers, opening up opportunities all around the world for trade, for investment. That's what our government is getting done.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Lambert. Mr. Speaker, last fall, 11,000 Canadians who had been turned down by the government for disability benefits were still waiting to be heard by the Social Security Tribunal. The Minister of Employment was boasting about having set up a top-caliber team to deal with the backlog by this summer. Since December, the so-called reinforcements have only dealt with some 428 applications. Why are the Conservatives struggling to help the wealthy while they're breaking promises that they have made to middle-class families? The Honourable Minister of Employment. Mr. Speaker, we put in place a plan to put officials to work to help deal with the waiting period for benefits. And now we are making progress. They're trying to deal with files before they even are before the tribunal. So we will continue to move this plan forward in order to provide quicker decisions to the people who need them.
Thousands of Canadians living with disabilities, some of them mentally ill, have been waiting years without income for a hearing at the Social Security Tribunal. The Conservatives promised to clean up the mess and to resolve these cases quickly. But now we learn that was just another broken Conservative promise. Only a fraction of them have received a settlement, while the rest are still waiting. These Canadians need help now. How much longer will the most vulnerable Canadians have to wait for Conservatives to clean up their mess?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, my predecessor put in place a plan to deal with this backlog. Officials within the Employment and Social Development Department are reviewing the cases that are in the waiting list in order to find settlements before them so that they don't even need to go before the tribunals. That will reduce the backlog, and we continue to be on track to have the backlog eliminated by the end of summer.
The Honourable Member for Newton North Belfast.
We're talking about people who are desperate, Mr. Speaker. They have serious health issues. Some of them are depressed and suicidal. These problems are made worse by the lack of income, and yet there has been nothing but delays and broken promises from that government. Vulnerable Canadians are being made to pay the price for Conservative incompetence. They deserve better. Will the Conservatives finally clean up the mess they made and give these Canadians a fair and speedy hearing?
Minister of Employment. Well, in fact, our hope, Mr. Speaker, is to resolve many of these cases before they even have to go to a hearing. And that is why doctors and other disability experts within my department are reviewing these cases and offering settlements to disabled people in order to resolve the matters and get rid of the backlog before the end of summer.
Honourable Member for Toronto Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Michael Kinsley defined a gaffe as the moment when a politician accidentally tells the truth. That's what happened when our usually invisible Minister of Finance said the high cost of doubling the TFSA limit will be a problem for the Prime Minister's granddaughter. His remark revealed this government's profoundly cynical and short-term approach to economic policy and its utter lack of a long-term vision for Canada. Why are the Conservatives building up billions of dollars of debt for all of our grandchildren with this $10,000 tax break for the already wealthy? And where is their plan for long-term growth and jobs?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, maybe she could explain something about gaffes. She's the one who said, quote, amen to higher taxes. Her leader said that budgets balance themselves. The day of the budget, her leader said that he would raise taxes on small businesses the very same day as our Prime Minister was cutting them. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we're more concerned with ensuring that taxpayers have money in their pockets. They're worried about whether government bureaucracies and politicians will have enough money 40 years from now, Mr. Speaker. We're cutting taxes today.
The Honourable Member for Toronto Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to say we are worried about long-term solvency for the Government of Canada, and we're worried about jobs and growth now. According to Carleton University economist Jennifer Robson, the Conservative income splitting plan will, and I quote, only reach at most 12.9% of all Canadian households and a maximum of 1/3 of families with children. Wow. 2/3 of families with children won't save even $1 from the so-called family tax cut. When will the Conservatives start giving help to those who need it rather than to those who don't?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative family tax cut and benefits will help 100% of families with kids. It'll allow income splitting for couples to save up to $2,000 a year, and it will increase the universal child care benefit to $2,000 a year for kids under 6 and $720 for kids 6 through 17. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are already admitting that they would raise taxes on millions of Canadian families and take away the universal child care benefit. We won't let them do that.
The Honourable Member for Trinity Spadina.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister says he has no idea how many jobs his budget will create. And that's understandable because most of the country has no idea why he's the Finance Minister. I'm wondering even if he is the Finance Minister. The reason he has no real job numbers is because the budget has no real numbers. For example, none of the so-called new infrastructure money will even arrive this year, which means no new bridges, no new water plants, no new transit, no new housing. None of it will get built thanks to this minister's inaction. Why won't the minister fight unemployment? Why won't he help vulnerable Canadians? Why won't he invest in cities?
The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, let me quote Mayor John Tory. A major step forward for Toronto and for the country. Good news for Toronto and good news for cities across Canada. The federal government committed to establish a dedicated fund to invest in public transportation. Very well done. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are turning their backs on yet another generation of Aboriginal kids with their latest budget. All children in Canada, wherever they live, deserve a quality education. But instead of being part of the solution, the Conservatives prefer to be part of the problem by blaming First Nation communities for their failure with Bill C-33. Why is the Prime Minister refusing to keep his word on investing $1.9 billion to make up for underfunding of Aboriginal education? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government is of the view that First Nations students, like all other Canadians, deserve access to a high-quality educational system, and that is why, since 2006, the government has been investing more than $10 billion to support education, both at the primary and secondary level, for thousands of First Nations students living on reserves. And in the budget last week, once again, we invested $200 million more to improve the educational system, and we will continue along those lines.
Mr. Speaker, it's not just in First Nations education where Conservatives have dropped the ball. When it comes to health services, it's as if Indigenous peoples are actually living in a different country than Canada. Despite First Nations and Inuit having higher rates of chronic disease and infant mortality, this government has cut basic services and made them harder to access. And the Conservatives' latest budget offered next to nothing on Aboriginal health. Why has the Conservative government abandoned its responsibility towards Indigenous peoples' health care?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, our government's committed to the health and safety of all Canadians, including our Aboriginal communities. We provide over $2.5 billion towards programs and services with Aboriginal health. This includes 24/7 access to nursing services in 80 remote communities, home and community care, and $34.5 million to improve the quality of health services in Aboriginal communities. This is just a few of some very important measures that we are doing in terms of Aboriginal health.
Mr. Speaker, to add insult to injury, this minister would like First Nations to believe he's actually doing them a favour by cutting services. He is targeting the poorest of the poor in this country, Mr. Speaker, by cutting welfare rates for New Brunswick's First Nations. Does this minister really believe that the only reason keeping First Nations on welfare is their, quote, passiveness? Or perhaps it might have something to do with high employment rates in the region?
The Honourable Minister of Aboriginal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, our government believes that income assistance on First Nation communities all across Canada should be consistent with provincial rates. And we have been working with Atlantic First Nations on aligning income assistance program policies with the national policy. And as the honourable member very well knows, this is before the court, and I will not comment further.
The Honourable Member for BBB Bay Jameson of VKU.
It's just shameful, Mr. Speaker. But that kind of talk shouldn't surprise us anymore coming from the Conservatives. According to Chief George Guinish, the planned cuts would mean around $908 a month for a family of 4 to live on, which is well below the poverty line. But the minister would have us believe it's for their own good. Does the minister truly believe that the reason New Brunswick's First Nations are getting social assistance is because they're too passive? The Honourable Minister, the answer is the same in French as it was in English. Quite simply, we apply the national directive, which provides that social assistance rates for members of First Nations in the provinces have to be the same or comparable to those for the general population in the province in question. And this is before the courts, and I will not comment further.
For New Brunswick Southwest.
Canadians are ready to respond to the disastrous earthquake that struck Nepal in northern India this weekend. The loss of life and ensuing humanitarian crisis are unimaginable. I know that all members of this House will extend their deepest sympathies to all those affected. Canada is always at the forefront when it comes to aiding those in need. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs please update the House on the actions our government is taking to respond to this natural disaster?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of all Canadians, I extend our deepest sympathies and heartfelt condolences to the people affected by the earthquake in Nepal and northern India. Canada is responding, as we always do. We have deployed the DART assessment team. A C-17 Globemaster is bringing supplies and equipment to the region. And as you heard from my colleague, we've also announced $5 million in assistance and have deployed additional consular staff to assist Canadians. We'll continue to work with our international partners and stand ready to take all necessary action to help those in need.
The Honourable Member for Squamish-Waunakita.
Mr. Speaker, there's a new member of the growing coalition of Canadians telling Conservatives and Liberals not to pass Bill C-51. That's the high-tech business community. This is an absolutely critical sector of our economy, and now high-tech entrepreneurs and CEOs say this dangerously vague legislation will make it harder to attract and grow businesses like theirs in Canada. After so many concerns from so many people, how can the Minister of Public Safety still claim that passing Bill C-51 is a good idea?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the members seem to forget that Canada has been targeted by the international jihadi movement, Mr. Speaker, that on October the 20th, there was a terrorist attack in Quebec, Mr. Speaker, And there was a terrorist attack here, Mr. Speaker, on the 22nd. And the least Canadians are expecting from their politician, Mr. Speaker, is to take action, Mr. Speaker. And that's what this government is doing. That's what I'm so proud of being a Conservative member, Mr. Speaker, who is not only investing in our police force to keep the Canadians safe, but also giving them the tools, and Canadians can count on us to keep on doing so. Thank you.
The honourable member for Alfred Pellan. According to Christiane Boudreau, whose son died in Syria and who's now trying to prevent the radicalization of other young people, Bill C-51 will make matters worse. CEOs of high-tech companies also fear the disastrous consequences of C-51. C-51 undermines Canada's international reputation as an open and tolerant place to do business. So why is the minister forging ahead with a useless bill that nobody wants? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we know the NDP have opposed everything our government has done to fight terrorism. They even opposed our strategy to prevent terrorism. Mr. Speaker, look what Aïl Raza said here, the president of a Muslim organization. He said the legislation is important to fight radicalization. We need tools to track terrorists who are traveling abroad, and that's what C-51 will do. I hope the NDP will finally open their eyes and support this bill. Now, a member for Laurier St. Marie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Canada's chairmanship of the Arctic Council won't be an unforgettable one. Won't be a memorable one, rather. It's a shame. Yet another missed opportunity for the Conservatives to show some leadership on the international stage and in the fight against climate change. For his part, the U.S. Secretary of State, who will be chairing for the next 2 years, wasted no time in stating his priority, fighting climate change. Will the minister actively back the U.S. agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, under Canada's leadership, we held the first of its kind of a mental wellness symposium when we also promoted Aboriginal traditional knowledge, the traditional way of life. We created an action plan to prevent marine oil pollution prevention in the Arctic. We also developed a framework to fight and reduce climate pollutants like black carbon and methane. Under Canada's leadership, we also established the Arctic Economic Council, which is promoting business opportunities, trade, and investment in the North. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Northwest Territories.
Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, Canada's out-of-step business agenda on the Arctic Council was an international embarrassment. The very moment the United States took over the Council chairmanship, the agenda shifted rightly back to the urgent issue of climate change. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said, "This is not a future challenge. This is happening right now." Why did this government waste a critical opportunity to work with the Arctic nations to address climate change for the whole 2 years of their chairmanship?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, under Canada's chairmanship, we consulted with Northerners from Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut to establish the priorities under our chairmanship for 2 years. Clearly, that member does not understand how the Arctic Council functions. It is a consensus-based organization. We build consensus across the Arctic nations to build Canada's agenda. That member had 2 years to ask a question about the Arctic in this House and failed to do so.
The honourable member for Bourassa. Mr. Speaker, in reference to the environment, the Prime Minister used to say the government always said it wanted to see regulations on a continental basis. And yet when President Obama announced the new American targets, the Prime Minister changed his tune, claiming Canada would announce its targets separately. Yes, but when? When pigs fly? Imagine, Mr. Speaker, in a 600-page budget, not a single word on climate change. Does the Prime Minister really want to saddle our grandchildren with all of our problems? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have always said that to effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions, all major emitters must be on board. We have aligned regulations with the United States in several areas, and we are working closely in developing the clean energy. Canada has one of the cleanest electricity supplies, with 80% of our energy coming from sources that emit no greenhouse gas emissions. The United States has only 30%. And at home, our government is reducing emissions while growing the economy without a job-killing carbon tax.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Mr. Speaker, for years the Prime Minister has maintained the fiction that Canada would be in lockstep with the U.S. GHG targets. When President Obama announced his country's latest goal, the Prime Minister bailed and said that Canada would announce its own targets. Apparently, these targets will be announced without a plan, without talking to the premiers, and without pricing carbon. Why embarrass Canada again at the G7 and the lead up to Paris with fictional and delusional targets? Why even bother with the pretense? Why humiliate Canada internationally once again?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, let me just read you a quote. The United States just took over chairmanship, and let me tell you what the U.S. Secretary Kerry had to say about our actions related to reducing black pollutants like black carbon and methane, and in other initiatives. Mr. Kerry said Canada's thanked for our work and said that he would continue to work with Canada and the work that we started. He also said, I quote, "It has given us all a strong platform on which to build on." That's a quote from the Secretary Kerry, who is now taking over the Arctic Council chairmanship from Canada.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac.
Be there to serve all Canadians. So why do we see Conservative Party candidates like Tim Laidler being promoted all over official government websites and social media feeds? Seriously? He's there for a photo op with a foreign dignitary. He's standing there with the Minister for an official policy announcement in Vancouver. He's even there with the Minister on the Veterans Affairs website. Why can't the Conservatives seem to understand that public resources are there to promote the public interest? Why is the Government of Canada promoting Conservative candidates?
The Honourable Prime Secretary of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that's kind of rich coming from a member opposite who 68 members of his own party illegally used the resources of this House, Mr. Speaker, to fund an illegal office, partisan NDP office, in Montreal, Mr. Speaker. 68 of those members. That doesn't even include the 23 other members who actually illegally used resources to fund advertising in the middle of a by-election campaign for another $1 million, Mr. Speaker. Between the NDP and the Liberals, some $45 million of taxpayers' money is outstanding, and it'd be nice if they paid it back.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac.
Les ministres conservateurs semblent
Conservative ministers are apparently using publicly funded events to raise the profile of Conservative candidates. A Conservative candidate in BC was at the airport for the Indian Prime Minister's arrival. The Defence Minister even played photographer. The same candidate attended official events with the Minister of Social Development and the Minister of Veterans Affairs. Why is the government using public funds to promote Conservative candidates? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, to see the NDP making a personal attack against a Canadian veteran. That is sad. Tim Laidler, Mr. Speaker, is still the president. Attacking a Canadian citizen, he's still the president of the Veterans Transition Network. He's been recognized across this country for his work with veterans, Mr. Speaker. He reaches out and supports Canadians who have been veterans, who are impacted by PTSD. He's won awards from all people in the province of British Columbia for his great work. He continues to work with veterans, Mr. Speaker. And of course, New Democrats take every opportunity to take a pot shot at this individual, but he is a great Canadian doing great things for Canadian veterans.
Order. The Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Last week, the Finance Minister delivered our government's plan for trade, training and tax cuts. While the opposition is focused on raising taxes, the Conservative government is focused on giving more money back to hard-working Canadian families. I don't want a single Canadian family to miss out on these cuts and benefits. Would the Minister of State for Social Development please update this House and all Canadians on the important deadline that's coming up for Canadian families?
The Honourable Minister of State.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member from Kitchener Centre for that excellent question. Mr. Speaker, all Canadians with children will benefit from our expanded universal childcare benefit, but about 200,000 families in Canada need to register, and there's a deadline coming up, Mr. Speaker, that's this Friday. If Canadians are wondering if they're going to receive that benefit, they can go to canada.ca/tax savings, or they can talk to a Conservative member of Parliament, because Conservatives want to help Canadians get their benefits. So 200,000 of them need to register by this coming Friday.
The Honourable Member for Malpeque.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians believe and expect when Parliament passes legislation or motions, the government will see to it that such laws are implemented. One such motion carried by a strong majority in this place was put forward by the member of Wascana, calling for a national public safety officer compensation benefit for first responders. Why has the government failed first responders by not providing funding in the budget for the public safety compensation benefit as duly passed by this House with a strong majority?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, our government has just invested $200 million in helping communities deal with disasters. We'll continue to work with the provinces, and we do that while respecting provincial jurisdiction, unlike the centralizing vision of the Liberal Party. And we will continue along those lines. We will support frontline responders and affected communities.
Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, the Duchess of Kent Legion is an important part of my community for cadets, wounded and homeless warriors, for seniors, for veterans. But it has faced tough times, and earlier this month, the members sold the building. The Legion is proposing that the officers' mess at Wolseley Barracks, which is slated for demolition, be sold to the Duchess so it can be converted to a new home for the Legion. Will the Minister of National Defence consider the Legion's proposal so it can continue to provide support and services for veterans in London?
Great idea. Good question. The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Take the member's intervention under advisement. Of course, the Canadian Armed Forces only maintains those facilities that serve a valuable purpose. I understand this facility is over 60 years old and is not providing value for money for the Canadian Armed Forces, but I will review the matter.
The Honourable Member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Mr. Speaker, it's deeply disturbing that the City of Vancouver is looking to legitimize the illegal marijuana drug trade. This irresponsible scheme to sell marijuana in stores, just like alcohol and cigarettes, can have only one effect: increasing marijuana use and addiction. It's exactly the plan the Liberal leader has been peddling for months. Can the Minister of Labour, a practicing physician, please update the House on our government's approach that will actually discourage kids from smoking marijuana?
Honourable Minister of Labour.
Well, I want to thank the member from West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country for his great work on this subject. And as a practicing pediatric surgeon, I say with confidence that marijuana is an illegal drug for a reason. It has serious and lasting health effects, particularly on children, including schizophrenia and psychosis. Our government does not support making access to illegal drugs easier, and the Minister of Health has made this clear to the Mayor of Vancouver. Unlike the Liberal leader who wants to make smoking marijuana a normal, everyday activity and have marijuana available in stores like alcohol and cigarettes, this Conservative government wants to stop children from smoking marijuana. Storefronts selling marijuana are illegal. Under our government, they'll remain illegal, and we expect...
The Honourable Member for Bas-Richelieu, Nicolette Bécancourt. Mr. Speaker, the EI program is no longer meeting the needs of Quebecers and is adversely affecting all regions of Quebec. The latest federal budget does nothing for regional development and nothing to improve the job situation. The federal government would rather take $8.2 billion from the EI fund over 2 years to pay for the increased TFSA contribution limit and income splitting instead of improving the living conditions of the unemployed. Is that the federal government's new social policy? Steal from the rich, steal from the poor to give to the rich? The Honourable Minister. That's false, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member is not aware of the facts. In fact, during the recession, we had to subsidize the EI fund. Now the fund is repaying taxpayers for that. We are going to reduce premiums by 21% in 2017, and that will put more money in the pockets of small business so they can hire more people and pay working employees. The Honourable Member for Métis Matane Matapédia. When Ottawa claims the National Energy Board examining Energy East pipeline is a neutral third party, there's reason for skepticism. The NEB refuses to have documents translated into French, and counsel for the board said in court oil and gas pipelines are generally beneficial to all Canadians. Energy East is no exception. People were already worried enough about the effects of a pipeline. Now they have to worry about the NEB's bias in its evaluation of the project. Will the government stop the charade and amend the act to prevent the NEB from being a puppet of the oil patch? The Honourable Minister. The NEB has fulfilled its obligations under the Official Languages Act. All documentation produced by the board have to be produced in both languages, and any other questions should be directed to the promoter of the project, the proponent.
Mr. Speaker, Thursday is tax filing day. While April 30th is always painful for Canadians who owe taxes, with more than 120 different federal tax credits, filing has become so complicated, experts believe that filers are missing out on hundreds of dollars owing to them. Moreover, the Fraser Institute states that Canadians are spending $6 billion in tax compliance costs. Rather than forcing Canadians to either hire accountants and tax lawyers or spend hours themselves searching for tax credits, why not simply reduce the tax rates for all Canadians? Does the government not believe that a simplified tax code and broad-based tax relief is preferable to make-work projects for tax lawyers and accountants?
And the Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the member knows that our Conservative government has numerous steps to simplify the tax system, but no more importantly, we have reduced taxes for the middle class. Shamefully, the opposition has voted against all those measures. Our low-tax plan is putting $6,600 back into the pockets of the average family of four, but we know that the opposition wants to reduce that. They want high taxes on the middle class, high taxes on middle-class families, high taxes on middle-class seniors, high taxes on middle-class consumers. Mr. Speaker, we're the government that will keep taxes low. Canadians know they're better off with this Conservative.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton St. Albert.
Mr. Speaker, I congratulate the government on finally balancing a budget after 7 unsuccessful attempts. However, Budget 2015 still contains questionable industrial subsidies such as the $100 million allocation to the Automotive Supplier Innovation Program. When will this government learn that industrial subsidies, special treatment for some industries but not others, picking winners and losers, and corporate welfare does not constitute true Conservative fiscal policy?
The Honourable Minister of Industry.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course our government wants to have a robust industrial policy that will create jobs all across the country, Mr. Speaker. And of course we are working with provinces, we're working with the private sector to keep taxes low. We have a 13-point lower corporate tax rate than what's offered in the United States, and we have a number of policies to keep us competitive and keep us moving forward. And with regard to our support for the automotive sector, I sure like the member from Edmonton St. Albert when he voted for these things, but now he's speaking against them in the Parliament of Canada. It just shows how far he's fallen from reasonable public policy.
That concludes question period for today. I would like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the gallery of His Excellency Ditmir Bushati, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Albania. I would also like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the gallery of Mr. Sadakuzu Tanigaki, President of the Japan-Canada Diet.
Tax agendas would hurt hardworking families. On this side of the House, we believe in helping families. The enhanced UCCB, for example, will put almost $2,000 back in the pockets of parents with kids under 6. It will put $720 back in the pockets of parents with kids between the ages of 6 and 17. With under 3 days to go before the deadline to get your enhanced child care benefit payment in July, our government is urging the hundreds of thousands of families who haven't yet signed up to sign up on www.canada.ca/tax savings. In Saskatchewan, there's an estimated 10,200 families that are not yet registered. That's an estimated 18,700 children who may not get the PM's enhanced benefit in July. Mr. Speaker, there's almost 500 families in Prince Albert alone. While the NDP and Liberals are focused on raising taxes, we're working hard to ensure that every mom and dad keeps more of their hard-earned money back in their pockets.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby, New Westminster.
Mr. Speaker, I proudly rise today to honour a very special group, the Royal City Musical Theatre Company in the City of New Westminster, which helped celebrate the 65th anniversary of our venerable Massey Theatre with a lavish production of a classic masterpiece, My Fair Lady. Mr. Speaker, this company is unique and consists primarily of volunteer talent engaged in enriching our lives with spectacular success. I saw this production with my family, and My Fair Lady was visually stunning. Colorful costumes, opulent sets, talented players and singers, and a 22-piece orchestra that truly brought the fantastic score to life. It was a special experience combining visual arts with singing, dancing, acting, and musicianship. The quality and the professionalism of the productions of the Royal City Musical Theatre Company have earned this group the respect of musical theatre goers from all over British Columbia. Bravo! A well-earned ovation to the Royal City Musical Theatre Company for their artistic excellence, for their hard work, and for their magic, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
Mr. Speaker, last week we fulfilled our commitment to balance the budget and to introduce income splitting for families with kids. I polled my constituents, and the vast majority support income splitting because it's fair and it's pro-family, and it acknowledges the real value stay-home parents provide their families and society in general. Don't be fooled by the opponents who say it will only help the rich. They just want to keep taking your money. I grew up in a family of 14 kids. My dad was a school teacher, and my mom was a stay-home mom, and income splitting would have definitely helped my parents. In fact, it would have helped most families in my small town, and none of us were rich. It won't solve every problem in the universe, and nobody said it would, but income splitting will help most two-parent homes. Unless you're in the same tax bracket as your spouse, or your family doesn't pay taxes at all, you're going to benefit from income splitting. Single parents will benefit from the other measures in our family tax program. I'm proud to keep this election promise as an important measure to bring justice and fairness to all families.
The Honourable Member for Random Buren, St. George's.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Katarina Roxon, an exceptional athlete from Kiffins and Random Buren, St. George's. Since taking up para swimming, Katarina has built an impressive resume and continues to set personal bests as she breaks both Canadian and world records. In early March, she set 2 world and 3 national records at the East Coast Swimming Championships in Mount Pearl, which she followed up with 2 gold medals, 2 silver and 1 bronze at the Can-Am International Swimming Championships in Toronto. She gained a spot on the teams that will be representing Canada at the IPC World Swimming Championships being held in Glasgow, Scotland, and the Para-Pan Am Games in Toronto. Katarina is a disciplined athlete and has her sights set on excelling at those 2 prestigious events. Given her determination, it is not surprising that she is a world-class swimmer. Katarina gives back to her sport, coaching the Aqua Aces Swim Club in Stephenville and preparing yet another generation of swimmers to reach their potential. I ask members to join me in congratulating Katarina Roxon on her remarkable achievements in the sport of para-swimming and wishing her continued success.
The Honourable Member for Sault Ste. Marie.
Mr. Speaker, today I would like to recognize the retirement of 2 significant role models who have served the city of Sault Ste. Marie. Mr. Joe Fratesi, the outgoing CAO, and Mr. Bill Freiberger, outgoing Commissioner of Finance and Treasurer. Joe served as City Councillor for Ward 6 for 3 terms, from 1976 to 1982. He has also worked as the longest-serving mayor, 1985 to 1996, and as the city's longest-serving CAO since 1996. Joe is someone I have worked alongside in my capacity as a City Councillor and in my role as an MP. It has been a privilege. Under Bill's watch,
Over 30 years in the Finance Department, the Sault City services have been among the highest and taxes among the lowest in Northern Ontario. For that, I am grateful. Gentlemen, cheers to your retirement, and thank you both for your great advice and service throughout the years.
Very good.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, by presenting a budget geared to the wealthy few, the Conservative government missed a perfect opportunity to show some compassion to serious ill EI recipients. People who have had to stop working in order to receive care, such as Josiane Monette. This Rivière-du-Nord resident, stricken with cancer, is also fighting for change to the EI system. After having paid into the system all her life, she has been cut off after only 15 weeks of sick leave benefits. This single mother has saved for her retirement, and therefore she is not entitled to social assistance. The government helps the richest few instead of helping ill people who are fighting for their lives. I wish Ms. Monette and everyone who is struggling with cancer, they should know that the NDP are at their side. And we will help them even more in October, and we will show more compassion for them. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Okanagan-Shuswap. Mr. Speaker, although I will not be a candidate in the 2015 election, I feel a sense of accomplishment as I prepare to leave this place. It has been an honour to be a small part of a government that has provided new direction for Canadians. Moving from the past Liberal government focused on I'm entitled to my entitlements to our government focused on taxpayers and accountability. Whereas the Liberals focus on minority interest groups, our government has focused on Canadian families and seniors. Our justice system is focused on victims of crime, not only the offenders. Our government has supported provinces and expanded health, education, and social transfers, not cutting the transfers as the Liberal government did to balance the budget. Our government's economic action plan providing jobs, growth, and prosperity for Canadians and a balanced budget, in contrast with the Liberals that have no plan for Canada's economy, just more taxes and more programs. Our budgets have invested in infrastructure by partnering with communities and provinces. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I have the comfort in leaving this place knowing that I have had a small part in making a difference for Canadians and the constituents of Okanagan-Shuswap.
Good job, Colin. The Honourable Member for Scarborough Centre.
On March 28th, I had the opportunity to join the Armenian Family Support Services at the Habitat for Humanity construction site in my riding of Scarborough Centre. To commemorate the 100-year anniversary of the Armenian genocide, the Family Support Services were holding a faith build to both honour the victims and to give back to the community. They were doing this by challenging 100 youth to don hard hats and pick up hammers at the construction site. On this day, I also had the great honour to meet Evgeny Yerganyan Kokoryan, a survivor of the Armenian genocide. I had the opportunity to hear her story and to celebrate her 100th birthday. On closing, Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Holy Trinity Armenian Church, the Armenian Family Support Services, and Habitat for Humanity for all of the good work they do in our communities.
Honourable Member for Berthier-Maskinongé. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to take the time to emphasize a great historical moment in my riding. In 1665, the Carignan Regiment landed and founded the city of Louisville. In fact, Louisville is in the very heart of my riding of Berthier-Maskinongé, and this year it is writing a very important chapter in our history by celebrating its 350th anniversary, which makes it one of the oldest cities in Quebec. Throughout the year, a number of activities and festivities will be offered to the people in my riding and across Quebec in order to honour the rich history of Louisville. For example, from April 30th to May 2nd, the play Once Upon a Time in 1952 will be presented by 7 actors from the region. This play will be one of the countless activities honouring the seminal moments of this town. I would like to commend the organizers, including the committee president, Doris Scott, the numerous volunteers and partners of this initiative for the city of Louisville. You make a difference in our region and its visibility across Quebec. Happy anniversary, Louisville.
North Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The liberation of the Netherlands was an important part of the Allied effort to free the people of Europe from tyranny and oppression, of which Canada played a crucial role. Our government recognizes the importance of commemorating the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the Netherlands and will be sending an all-party delegation led by the Minister of Veterans Affairs. Over 60 veterans who helped liberate the Netherlands will be participating. Unfortunately, one veteran, Mr. Art Boone, who was invited as a guest of the Dutch government, is unable to be accompanied by his son, a teacher. This is because the Avon Maitland School Board has refused Rick Boone's request for unpaid leave to travel with and provide care for his father. This is absolutely shameful, Mr. Speaker, and I once again call upon the school board to reverse this decision and do the right thing. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Saint Bruno Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, a report from UN Women was published. This report shows that the governments have responsibilities to take for genuine gender equality. Mr. Speaker, I will quote a passage from this report. The divisions between economic and social policy are artificial. Connecting the two is key to the realization of rights. Unfortunately, the past years have shown that the Conservatives are not listening to the experts. When we talk about gender equality, the environment, the economy, I always observe the same thing. Since 2006, Canada is no longer governed by knowledge, expertise, or science. In fact, our country has been abandoned to the dishonest and reckless ideology of the Conservatives. Mr. Speaker, Canadians have had enough, and in October, they will vote accordingly. Thank you. The honourable member for Lotbinière-Chaudière. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Leader of the Opposition called our tax cuts giveaways. On this side of the House, we will make no apologies for keeping more money in the pockets of Canadians. That is why we're helping middle-class Canadian families through our new family tax cut and enhanced universal child care benefit. These measures will benefit 100% of families with children, leaving every family with more money in their pockets. The NDP and Liberals have something in common. They both think that taxpayer money is theirs. The NDP and Liberals would take this money from Canadians and spend it on big government bureaucracy. Mr. Speaker, it must be said, the NDP members and the Liberal members don't care about defending the interests of Canadian and Quebec families, and the voters will remember that. Only a Conservative government allows Canadians to keep more money in their pockets. The honourable member for Saint-Laurent-Cartierville.
Today marks International Dance Day, and thus let us express, show and tangibly demonstrate our support for the dancers, choreographers and producers. On the world stages, they selflessly and spectacularly remind us that dance is a wonderful activity, an incredible art that, as legislators, we need to encourage and support. What else than dance better connects human beings with their own bodies and souls, their own emotions and energy, and, in some ways, with the whole universe. Et nous-mêmes, nous tout.
And all of us here are rehearsing for the upcoming election performance. And we know that being a politician is like dancing on eggshells. One faux pas, one poorly executed pirouette, and we end up with scrambled eggs. So let us salute all dancers and express both our support and admiration for them.
Mr. Speaker, let us dance today, and for that matter, every day.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Quinte West.
Mr. Speaker, our Conservative government has always stood up for the protection of Canadians. We have taken strong action to ensure that law enforcement have the tools they need to do their jobs. This includes passing over 30 new tough-on-crime laws and making record investments in crime prevention and law enforcement. Interestingly, new Liberal candidate Bill Blair supported our Conservative government's Safe Streets and Communities Act, saying, and I quote, "This new legislation responds to today's needs and will allow police to improve their ability to protect the communities we serve," unquote. This is in stark contrast to the Liberal leader who voted against this bill and in fact went so far as to say he would repeal all minimum prison sentences. While Bill Blair and the Liberal leader contemplate which dangerous criminals belong in jail and for how long, Mr. Speaker, our Conservative government will continue taking strong action to protect our fellow Canadians.
The honourable member for Welling.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Auditor General delivered another scathing report. First Nations are being forced to seek health care from substandard clinics with undertrained staff. There has been mismanagement at the Office of the Canadian Forces Ombudsman. Conservatives are not even evaluating the impact of tax giveaways to the wealthy. Yet year after year, these audits reveal the same sort of thing. Despite all their rhetoric and self-promotion, when it comes to actually governing the country, keeping Canadians safe, managing the finances, Conservatives are just incompetent. But it's not just their incompetence, Mr. Speaker. What's worse, no minister ever takes responsibility for that incompetence. Canadians don't expect government to be perfect, but they expect a government that will take responsibility for its mistakes. And in a few months, Mr. Speaker, when Canadians turf these Conservatives for a principled new democratic government, that's what they're going to get.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today because I have some good news for hard-working families in the riding of Miramichi. Our Conservative government is reducing taxes on middle-class families. As we announced in the balanced budget tabled by Finance Minister last week, our government has expanded and extended the universal child care benefit to provide more money to 100% of families with children. Parents will receive almost $2,000 per year for every child under the age of 6 and $720 per year for every child 6 to 17, regardless of their income or the form of child care they choose. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, there are still nearly 200,000 Canadian families who are eligible to receive this benefit from our Conservative government but have not signed up. I strongly encourage all families in Miramichi to go to canada.ca/tax savings to ensure that they receive all the money they deserve.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Constitution of Canada is clear, very lucid, very precise on Senate appointments. A senator shall be resident in the province for which they are appointed. Period. What did the Prime Minister do when Mike Duffy told him that he was not a resident of PEI but of Ontario? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
It's really a shame that the NDP are trying to make a victim out of Mike Duffy right now, Mr. Speaker. Look, Mr. Speaker, this government will continue to provide every possible assistance to the Crown in its case against Mr. Duffy, but it's Mr. Duffy's actions that are in front of the court, Mr. Speaker. And as you know, of course, it would be inappropriate for me to comment on evidence before the court.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Just did comment on the evidence before the court because he just told us that the government is helping in the Mike Duffy trial with evidence before the court. But why isn't the government helping put evidence before the court in the case of Carolyn Stewart-Olson? Oh, I know, because she was never brought before the court because she's still very close to the Conservatives. It's only when you fall out that you get into trouble. Now, here's the government's response. They actually put out a memo saying that anyone who owned property in a province could say that they were a resident of that province even if they didn't actually live there. That's the government. Why did they tell senators they could lie about where they live?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The constitutional practice on this has been clear for almost 150 years. But speaking about misrepresenting the truth, Mr. Speaker, how about the NDP, who have 68 members of Parliament, who, contrary to the rules of this House, paid for partisan political offices in Montreal, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the Leader of the Opposition himself owes the Canadian taxpayer more than $400,000. He refuses to pay that money back. He broke the rules. He and the 67 other members of his party ought to pay that money back to taxpayers.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Dean Del Maestro, real court. Conservatives and Liberals, kangaroo court. The government wastes $100 million of taxpayers' money every single year to pay senators' salaries and expenses. $100 million. Canadians don't know how much of that is being plundered by the likes of Mike Duffy and Mac Harb, and the government is doing everything it can to make sure we never find out. Conservatives are setting up yet another kangaroo court, this time to protect senators who charged fraudulent expenses. If they have nothing to hide, why are they covering it up?
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, I would completely reject the premise of that question, but it's actually the NDP who are in front of the courts, Mr. Speaker. They're in front of the courts because 68 of their members illegally used the resources of this House of Commons, Mr. Speaker, of taxpayers, Mr. Speaker, for illegal offices in Montreal. They owe $2.7 million to the taxpayers of Canada, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition owes some $400,000, and 67 other of his members owe the rest of that money, Mr. Speaker. I would encourage him to do the right thing for taxpayers, and pay the money back.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we'll actually know the seriousness of that the day that member has the courage to go stand out there and repeat out there what he just said here. He'll learn the difference between a real court and a kangaroo court. Dans leur publicité cette année.
In their ads this year, the average wage of a Canadian woman in Canada would have dropped by $40,000 to get in line with the way that they do budget. So can they explain to us how this year the typical average woman in their analysis earns $40,000 a year less than last year? Minister of State.
Speaker, make no mistake about this. This government has brought forward a budget that is a low-tax budget that will build this economy and create jobs. Mr. Speaker, the $42,000 that the member talks about, that member wants to take that money, they want to take all measures that individual makes because they believe that those are the wealthy of Canada. Half of all tax-free savings accounts, Mr. Speaker, are those who earn under $42,000. And, Mr. Speaker, they believe they're the Canadian wealthy. They want to tax high-income Canadians. We won't let it happen.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The only time that member's ever been right was last week when he stood in this House and screamed, "Shame on the government!" Government's failures on tax policy show incompetence, but their failures on First Nations health care show contempt and neglect. First Nations communities in Ontario and Manitoba lack basic health services from their federal government. No guaranteed access to clinical care. Major health and safety problems at the nursing stations. Only 1 out of 45 nurses evaluated had been given proper training courses. This is the responsibility of the federal government. Why such neglect for First Nations?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to report that Health Canada is well on their way to addressing all of the issues that the Auditor General has raised. Our number one priority is making sure Aboriginals on First Nations have access to healthcare providers. So we are making sure that we have nurses that are on reserve. We're also encouraging more practitioners, whether they be nurses or doctors, to work on First Nations. So we're giving them Canada loans, student loan forgiveness. We also have a new recruitment and retention strategy that's been very successful. We have over 250 applications. And Mr. Speaker, no matter what, if anyone is sick, we will, of course, use our emergency medical.
Order. I just want to let other members know we moved on. Some members seem to be carrying on conversations from the previous line of questioning. If they need to do so, they can exit the chamber to do that, but not while other members have the floor. The Honourable Member for Beausejour.
Mr. Speaker, even Mike Duffy himself was so concerned that he did not meet the constitutional requirements to sit as a senator for Prince Edward Island that he asked the Prime Minister if he could represent Ontario. That's logical, since Mr. Duffy had lived in Ottawa for 40 years. Is the Prime Minister so disconnected from reality that he thought he could ignore the Constitution and appoint Mike Duffy for Prince Edward Island, and then pretend to be surprised to learn that the senator had lived in Ottawa for 40 years. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, look, the NDP and the Liberals are trying to make a victim out of Mike Duffy, Mr. Speaker. Now, we know why they're doing this. The NDP, of course, have to answer for the fact that 68 of their members illegally used the resources of this House, pretending that they were hiring people in their Ottawa offices, but sending them to Montreal against the rules of this House. The Liberals and the NDP together account for almost $45 million in illegal House of Commons taxpayers' resources, Mr. Speaker. They promised to pay it back. They never did. They're in front of the courts. Both of them together want to create a coalition. My gosh, Mr.
The Honourable Member for Beausejour.
Mr. Speaker, even Mike Duffy himself was so concerned about not meeting the constitutional residency requirements to be a senator from Prince Edward Island that he asked the Prime Minister to appoint him from Ontario. Makes sense, since Mr. Duffy's lived in Ottawa for over 40 years. But is the Prime Minister so out of touch that he thought he could bypass the Constitution, appoint Mike Duffy from Prince Edward Island, just for the chance to get up and feign indignation that he recently discovered that Mike Duffy has lived in Ottawa for 40 years?
Yeah. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, as I said, the constitutional practice on this has been clear for almost 150 years, Mr. Speaker. But at the same time, while we were fighting very hard in order to bring accountability to the Senate, it was the NDP and the Liberals who were trying to make victims out of these people. Disgraced former Liberal Senator Mac Harb, who represented Ottawa, with that member of Parliament in this House before becoming a senator, is accused of taking $240,000 of taxpayers' resources, Mr. Speaker. They have to answer for that. Of course, we can't forget the senator from Puerto Vallarta who was appointed by the Prime Minister Trudeau, Mr. Speaker. Can you imagine the coalition that we would have? That pretend leader, a deputy Prime Minister who's the leader of the opposition.
The Honourable Member for Kings Hands.
Mr. Speaker, exams are almost done and students are struggling to find summer work. The Conservatives think that promoting themselves through government advertising is actually more important than helping young people find summer jobs. The Conservatives have slashed the number of positions created by the Canada Summer Jobs program by more than half. Meanwhile, the cost of just one ad during the NHL playoffs could help pay for 30 summer jobs. When will the Conservatives stop wasting tax dollars on these ads and start helping more students find summer work?
That's right. The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, we are creating jobs through tax cuts, training, and trade, and we are advertising these benefits to Canadian families and Canadian youth. In fact, Nina Whitmer learned about the grants that we're providing for apprentices. She always wanted to be a stonemason, and with that grant, she was able to get accredited with her Red Seal. She's now won the National Skills Competition, is graduating debt-free, and is on her way to starting her very own masonry business. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals don't want Nina and others to know about the apprenticeship grant because the Liberals would take it away.
The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has been very skittish about clarifying whether or not Mike Duffy acted as a conduit between Enbridge and his office. Yeah. We know that both the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff were in direct communications with Duffy about Enbridge, and Enbridge is now saying that they thought these exchanges with Duffy were inappropriate, and so they warned the Prime Minister's office. So will the Prime Minister confirm whether or not Enbridge did speak to him and whether or not he took any steps to tell Duffy that this supposed case of reverse lobbying was inappropriate? What steps did the Prime Minister take?
Very good. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, I reject most of that question. But look, these are matters that are before the court. I'm not going to comment on evidence that's before the court. But, Mr. Speaker, as you know, I've been accused of being too partisan. But last night, when I got home to my condominium here, my apartment in Ottawa Centre, how excited I was to get the 2015 tax tips for families from my Member of Parliament here in Ottawa. Chock full of 14 pages of tax savings for the people of Canada, thanks to this government. I want to thank the NDP Member of Parliament for Ottawa Centre for highlighting all of these great tax things that we have done on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. And I hope you'll continue to vote for them in the next budget. Congratulations.
such a nice moment. Let's not spoil it. Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague might believe that the House of Commons is a place to act out farce. We believe it's a place to answer questions of the Canadian people. Here's the thing, Mr. Speaker. If Enbridge did indeed...
Order. The Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay has the floor. Members need to come to order so we can hear the question. The Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Because here's the thing. If Enbridge did indeed warn the Prime Minister, then why was the Prime Minister asking Mike Duffy for a briefing on Enbridge on February 17th, 2012? And 3 days later, when Duffy sent Nigel Wright a note that also was sent to Enbridge executives, what was in that note? And it was the Prime Minister. Why was he still speaking with Duffy about Enbridge on April 4th, 2012, if these negotiations had indeed been red flagged with his office as inappropriate?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I completely reject that question. And as I said, we're not going to comment on matter before the courts. It's Mr. Duffy's actions that are before the court, Mr. Speaker. But I don't think it's a farce to talk about the tax cuts that this government has brought in, highlighting, as the member for Ottawa Centre did. He highlighted things like the apprentice tax credit, income splitting, Mr. Speaker, the universal child care benefit. It was 14 pages of tax cuts that this government had brought in that he was taking credit for. Now, unfortunately, the member for Ottawa Centre voted against all of those, but good news for the people of Ottawa Centre. In a few days, that 14-page guide is going to be 16, 17, and 18 pages of even more tax savings.
The Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île. The Prime Minister's silence on these meetings is really troubling. The PM's Chief of Staff has connections to Enbridge. Mr. Duffy was in contact with Enbridge, and the Prime Minister met with Mr. Duffy on the subject of Enbridge. But on their side, it's radio silence, as if nothing happened. Does the Prime Minister and his team have something to hide on the role of his staff and the Senator with Enbridge? The Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've already answered that question, but there's another question, Mr. Speaker. Why has this member not used more than $25,000 against the rules of this House for work in her riding?
Owes Canadian taxpayers almost $30,000 because, as opposed to supporting her own constituency with the resources provided to it, she funneled money to an illegal office in Montreal, and she ought to pay it back.
Member for La Pointe de l'Île. The government has to defend the interests of all Canadians, not only those of a big oil company. Enbridge claims that at no time did it ask the Senator to advance its interests with the federal government. But Duffy, on the other hand, found these meetings significant enough to send a note to the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff on February 20th, 2012. Did the Prime Minister receive this note? And what was the subject of the meeting he had with Mr. Duffy on the 4th of April, 2012? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I'm not going to comment on matters before the court. It's Mr. Duffy's actions that are before the court now, Mr. Speaker.
But at the same time, the member for Quebec, for example, used up to $30,000 against the rules of this House, Mr. Speaker.
Parliament, the NDP member of Parliament for Quebec, redirected resources for her riding from Quebec to an illegal office in Montreal. She was part of 68 members of the NDP caucus who did that, breaking the rules, taking money meant for their residents, meant for their constituents, and funneling it to an illegal office. They ought to pay it back.
The Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Speaker, there have been serious allegations of sexual misconduct and assault in the ministry for some time, and a failure to properly address complaints. The Chief of Defence Staff initiated an investigation last year after horrible incidents involving sexual assault were revealed in major media reports. And the Minister of National Defence confirmed that the report of Madame Deschamps will be released tomorrow, and if not, when? And will it be made public in its entirety?
The Honourable Prime Minister, Secretary of the Minister of Defence.
Well, Mr. Speaker, no one who has chosen to serve Canada as a member of our armed forces should be subjected to this kind of disgusting and unacceptable behaviour. As we've already said, allegations of sexual harassment in the armed forces are truly disturbing. And that's why the Chief of Defence Staff ordered an external, independent review into how the Canadian Armed Forces deals with sexual misconduct and sexual harassment. He's also directed the establishment of the Canadian Armed Forces Strategic Response Team on sexual misconduct to develop a detailed action plan to address the report's recommendations. This action plan, along with the report, will be released soon.
Honourable member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Yesterday, the Auditor General revealed serious problems in the Office of the Ombudsman, the only place that the people in the armed forces can turn to. There was a horrible series of incidents of sexual assault that were revealed by the media. It is of paramount importance to take this seriously. Can the Minister of National Defence confirm that the report will be published tomorrow and that necessary changes will be made?
As I already said, Mr. Speaker, the report and the action plan will be released soon. As to the Auditor General's report, National Defence accepts all the recommendations from the Auditor General's investigation. The lack of accountability for taxpayers' dollars was unacceptable. Steps have already been taken by the Department of National Defence and the Office of the Ombudsman to strengthen accountability. Specific measures including a new agreement to better manage employees and processes for better financial accountability.
The Honourable Member for Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing.
Once again, no answer, Mr. Speaker. Another case that is paying the price of the incompetence of the Conservatives is that of Aboriginal healthcare services. As we're learning from the Auditor General, this care leaves a lot to be desired for remote communities in Manitoba and Ontario. Out of all of the Health Canada nursing positions, only one person completed the 5 mandatory Health Canada training centres, 1 out of 45. Why are the Conservatives neglecting the remote communities of Northern Ontario and Manitoba? Honourable Minister of Health.
Speaker, Health Canada supports 734 Aboriginal health facilities across the country, including investments of $30 million annually to make sure that those are maintained, and they've just built another 5 facilities across the country. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, any Aboriginal Canadian living on First Nations, even if it's for a routine appointment, has access at all times to emergency transportation, and that is available to anyone at all times, should there be any concerns on the First Nations. But, Mr. Speaker, one of the biggest issues is recruitment and retention. We have launched a recruitment and retention campaign for more nurses, and it's going well.
Mr. Speaker, every year the Conservatives spend billions of dollars in order to offer tax credits and loopholes to the wealthy. This government's tax expenditures have not stopped multiplying for 10 years, and the Auditor General is concerned that the Conservatives are refusing to tell us how much all of these gifts are costing and who's benefiting from them. Will the Conservatives make the Finance Department's secret report public to shed light on these tax loopholes?
Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, our government believes in keeping taxes low, but we also believe in ensuring all corporations and Canadians pay their fair share of tax. That's why since 2006, we've aggressively moved to close over 85 tax loopholes. The loopholes we're closing amount to billions of dollars annually. That means lower taxes for all Canadians, not just a select few.
The Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
The Conservatives have gone from hiding their finance minister, hiding the facts of their budget. Give them credit, Speaker. Conservatives have been focused like a laser on giving away billions to the wealthy and the well-connected. We now learn from the Auditor General himself that Conservatives haven't even bothered to count all the money going out the door. Conservatives didn't have the decency to track all the money or whether any of their programs were actually working. They must be borrowing the accounting manual from the Senate over there. They say good news sells itself, Mr. Speaker. So is that why Conservatives are having to spend millions more selling their bad budget to Canadians?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, they say one thing here, but exactly the opposite in their writings. They call our tax breaks giveaways when they're on Parliament Hill, but the NDP member for Ottawa Centre actually takes credit for them. In his tax guide, Here he has the children's fitness tax credit, which he voted against. Here he has pension splitting for seniors, Mr. Speaker. Here he has the pension amount increase. These are not giveaways, Mr. Speaker. As the NDP member for Ottawa Centre understands, these are tax cuts. If only they would actually vote in favour of them when they come back to the House of Commons, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Bourassa. Mr. Speaker, our young people are ending their school year and are already concerned that they won't have a job this summer. Rather than helping our students to find jobs, the Conservatives prefer wasting taxpayers' money on partisan ads. Moreover, they have cut most of the jobs from the Canada Summer Jobs program. Mr. Speaker, cutting one single ad during the NHL playoffs would have allowed for 30 young people to get a job this summer. Why are the Conservatives continuing to waste taxpayers' money on partisan advertising rather than helping our young people? The Honourable Minister of Employment. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals used ads during the sponsorship scandal in order to give money to their Liberal friends. We are using ads in order to inform Canadians about tax decreases and other benefits. Mr. Speaker, we present these ads to explain the cuts to families, which will save them $2,000, and the increase in the child tax benefit will provide $2,000 for every child under the age of 6 and $720 for every child between the ages of 6 and 17. Mr. Speaker, we are giving the money directly to taxpayers by reducing their taxes.
Mr. Speaker, Conservatives spent $750 million on self-promotional advertising while clawing back more than $900 million from Environment Canada. Apparently, self-promotion is more important than species at risk, or more important than toxic spills in Vancouver, or more important than that elephant in the room, climate change. Will this government advertise its $12 million cut to species at risk? Will it advertise its $188 million cut from climate change? Mr. Speaker, is it not ironic and tragic that Environment Canada funds are being used to bankroll Conservative Party advertising?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, no federal government has done more for the environment than this government. In the 2015 budget, the budget is reinvesting fundings for federal contaminated sites, the public transit, meteorological navigational warning for the Arctic, the chemicals management plan. The president of the Canadian Consumer Specialty Product Association said, I quote, "We see the renewal of the plans as a continuation of Canada's world-leading initiatives." And what would the Liberals do, Mr. Speaker? They would increase taxes on Canadians and on consumers and middle-class families. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Budgets are about priorities. Tragically, about 25 police and firefighters die in the line of duty on average every year. A compensation package for these heroes, Mr. Speaker, would be less than half of what this government is spending on bogus, crappy, self-partisan ads, Mr. Speaker. $7 million is what we're talking about. My question to the Prime Minister is, how does he justify wasting $14 million tax dollars, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, of course, we will not take any lessons from the third party on support for our police and first responders across this country. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it was the Liberal Party that closed down the RCMP training depot when they were in power because they refused to pay for new recruits. In contrast to that, Mr. Speaker, we are supporting law enforcement and security agencies across this country by giving them the tools that they need to actually keep Canadians safe, including investments of $300 million in Budget 2015.
The Honourable Member for Alfred Pellan. The Auditor General tells us only 38% of departments and agencies have submitted a security plan. These plans are required under national security legislation enacted by the Conservatives in 2009. 38% is pretty mediocre by itself, but it's even worse when you consider that the plans were supposed to have been submitted 2 years ago. Before passing even more security legislation that violates Canadians' freedoms, could the government have the decency to put an end to its own mismanagement when it comes to security plans?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, the opposition party, the NDP, is so off base with these types of questions. They have not supported a single measure that this government has brought forward to keep Canadians safe. In fact, just recently in committee we had C-51, the anti-terrorism legislation. It is truly unfortunate that such misinformation, either by intentional reasons or because of a pure lack of understanding on behalf of the official opposition, has pushed such bad information about that bill, when at the very heart of this bill, C-51, is the national security of this country and the protection of all Canadians.
The honourable member Forrest
Well, Mr. Speaker, C-51 is so detrimental to our rights and freedoms that thousands of Canadians have come out to protest against this one piece of legislation. Now, Stephen Tuke, former Dean of Law at McGill, former UBC President, and currently the Director of the Munk School of Global Affairs, has called Bill C-51, and I quote, "so badly drafted, so expansive in scope, and so open to abuse that one must wonder how a responsible political leadership could bring it forward." Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Public Safety now listen to the chorus of Canadians who are speaking out against Bill C-51 and withdraw this bill immediately? Hear, hear. Hear,
Mr. Speaker, the official opposition has not supported a single measure to keep Canadians safe. In fact, it was quite apparent when I talk about the misinformation that's been pushed out by the NDP, whether it was intentional or a lack of understanding. It was clear it's probably the latter, because in committee and clause by clause, the very first amendment that member put forward, the officials that were there had to explain it to him that he was incorrect. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we are going to stand up for the security of this country and the safety of all Canadians.
The honourable member for Surrey North. Mr. Speaker, the violence in Surrey has reached crisis level. Another shooting last night. This is the 25th shooting in the last 8 weeks. People in my community are worried for their safety and the safety of their neighbours. Meanwhile, the Conservative 2015 budget does not even mention the word crime prevention, gangs, or Surrey for that matter, Mr. Speaker. And Conservative cuts have left the RCMP unable to manage crime databases and forensic services. Mr. Speaker, will the Conservatives stop making excuses and make funds available protecting people in my community?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps I'd like to point out to that member that, in fact, we have actually invested $2.8 million to crime prevention in Surrey since 2006. However, having said that, Mr. Speaker, Canadians will not tolerate being held hostage in their own communities by thugs and criminals who are members of street gangs. Our government has been clear that this sort of illegal activity is completely unacceptable, and that is why we have passed more than 30 tough-on-crime bills, including harsh mandatory prison sentences for those involved in drive-by.
The honourable member for Newton North Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That kind of a response gives no comfort to the citizens of Surrey. Empty words are simply not good enough. The Conservatives are abandoning our community in the middle of a crisis. Lives are at risk. People deserve to be safe from violence. They need real action, not excuses from that minister. I have stood in this House and called for more RCMP to deal with the violence in Surrey. The Mayor of Surrey is asking the federal government to approve 100 more RCMP. Will they commit now to approve this without delay?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I certainly have good news for that member. Budget 2015 includes new funding for our security agencies across the country, including the RCMP, $300 million, Mr. Speaker. I'd also just like to reiterate that it is this government that has passed more than 30 tough-on-crime bills to keep Canadians safe, including in that member's riding. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, we recognize that crime prevention is necessary to keep Canadians safe, and that's why in Surrey, BC, since 2006, we have provided $2.8 million for crime prevention.
Honourable member for Etobicoke Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government recognizes the importance of commemorating the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the Netherlands. Unfortunately, one veteran who was invited as a guest of the Dutch government is unable to be accompanied by his son because the Avon Maitland School Board his son works for has refused his request for unpaid leave. Wow. Can the Minister please update this House on this specific case? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
That member who served himself in uniform. I spoke, Mr. Speaker, with Art Boone this week, an inspiring 90-year-old veteran who wants to return with his comrades to the Netherlands, a country that Canadians liberated 70 years ago. I'm truly hopeful that the school board, who I also spoke with this week, will look at this issue and try and find an outcome to let Mr. Boone go on this excursion with his comrades and with his son.
The honourable member for Laurier Sainte Marie. Mr. Speaker, Nepal is going through a terrible tragedy, and it's the duty of our government to do everything in its power under the circumstances to provide help and protection to Canadian nationals. It's incredibly sad today to hear the stories of Canadians who feel abandoned by their own government. Can the Minister tell us what he plans to do to rescue all Canadians stuck in Nepal as quickly as possible?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, this is a tragedy, and we join the rest of the world in mourning the tragic loss of life that has occurred in Nepal. We have deployed additional consular staff to help deal with this crisis. We have sent hundreds of emergency travel documents. A Canadian consular service point has been established, and, Mr. Speaker, the first C-17 plane has left for New Delhi with evacuated Canadians.
The member for Hamilton East Stony Creek.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the midst of this tragedy, there are many, oh so many Canadian families who are desperately worried about their loved ones, and many have expressed frustration with the response of the Canadian government. These families are saying they're having difficulty getting clear answers from the Department of Foreign Affairs, and unlike other countries, Canadian evacuees are being told they'll have to find their own way home from New Delhi. Canadians need answers as to how this government is going to address these concerns.
Mr. Speaker, we have deployed additional staff to assist the people dealing with the crisis. In fact, 11 additional staff are already there in Kathmandu, while another 4 just arrived today on the RCF C-17 Globemaster, and we have evacuated Canadians. The first C-17 has just left for New Delhi, and we are pleased to be of assistance, and I commend the Canadian consular officials and everyone else involved that have helped make this happen.
The honourable member for Parkdale High Park.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians depend on first responders to keep us safe, and we owe them our full support in return. Hear, hear. But across the country, firefighters are experiencing an increase in post-traumatic stress disorder, and they're not being given the resources they need to deal with it. We've also seen the Liberals and the Conservatives vote against the NDP bill that would have protected volunteer firefighters while they did their job of protecting Canadians. So why is this government failing our firefighters?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member knows full well that the firefighters across this country do not fall under the jurisdiction of federal governance. They are municipal, provincial, and so on. So I appreciate that question, but I'd also like to point out, Mr. Speaker, that I'm actually married to a firefighter. And I can tell you right now that I certainly thank all firefighters across this country, especially my husband, who works in the City of Toronto, for keeping Torontonians safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Quebec City. Under the Conservatives, Canadians are working harder and harder just to keep their heads above water. Despite record profits in the billions of dollars, Canadian banks are now going to charge clients to pay mortgage payments. And after introducing pay-to-pay practices, now they're going to allow their clients the privilege of paying a fee to make mortgage payments. The Conservatives have declined to stop the banks, and Canadians are footing the bill. Will the Conservatives give in again to their banker friends, or will they finally stand up for the middle class?
Only party in this House that has consistently stood up for the consumers. Unlike the opposition that would raise taxes on middle-class consumers, we've lowered taxes and put more money into the pockets of middle-class consumers. Our government has taken initiative to improve low-cost bank accounts and expand no-cost banking options for more than 7 million Canadians. We introduced the debit and credit card code of conduct. Sadly, the Liberals and the NDP have voted against all these measures. Mr. Speaker, we're here. We support Canadians.
The honourable member for Vancouver Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General slammed this government for failing its responsibility to mitigate risks posed by the spread of antibiotic resistance in Canada, which the World Health Organization calls a major global threat to human health. While the Minister of Health, as usual, blamed the provinces, the AG blames her for shirking federal leadership. In 2009, this government cut funding for the Committee on Antibiotic Resistance. This pattern of callous mismanagement of public health and safety puts lives in danger. Will the minister stop blaming others and commit to lead a meeting with provinces on antibiotic misuse and
the Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member couldn't be more wrong. First of all, we're working right now with the World Health Organization to develop a global action plan. We're also working with the World Bank to study the economic impact of antimicrobial resistance. We actually have a national action plan on antimicrobial resistance, and we are encouraging the provinces, and I did when I sat down with them, and I continue to encourage them to work with us on our plan, and I hope after the AG's report they will be more open to that. We also have an education campaign, Mr. Speaker, that targets health professionals and the veterinary community. And for the first time in history, we got the human health side and the animal health side together to work on antimicrobial resistance.
Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General produced a damning report on the government's neglect for public safety with its prison policies. 1,500 inmates released cold turkey without reintegration programs and therefore at greater risk to reoffend. Cutting incentives for skill trainings leaves inmate on release without the skills to be gainfully employed. Holding low-risk offenders longer, adding $26 million to correction costs for no real gain. This issue is about public safety. Why is this government putting Canadians at risk?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, our Conservative government is committed to keeping Canadians safe, and that is why we're pleased with the Auditor General, who found that our truth in sentencing measures have worked because more prisoners are staying behind bars where they belong. So we're talking about ending the 2-for-1 credits. Most Canadians believe that someone who commits a serious crime, and we're talking serious crime, not light sentences, we're talking federal penitentiaries, serious crimes for 2 years or more, that they should actually, if they're going to do the serious crime, they should do the time, Mr. Speaker, and that member should get on board with that particular provision. Thank you.
The honourable member for NDG Lachine. On Friday, a resident of Lachine informed me that a community mailbox was going to be installed right next to their childcare centre. All of the parents called Canada Post to express concern for their children's safety because they knew there would be a lot more cars and a lot more traffic. Canada Post isn't backing down. They don't see any problem. Does the minister see anything wrong with this picture? Does she understand that the changes go against the needs of the people? The Honourable Minister.
As I said before, Canada Post has delivered 1.4 billion fewer letters than it did in 2006, and as a result, they are converting the remaining one-third of houses to community mailboxes. In that process, Mr. Speaker, every single person affected by this change is sent a survey, asked to fill it in, asked what they want and what they don't want in terms of a community mailbox. That is taken back, taken into consideration, and there's a 90% satisfaction rate.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le Fjord. Yesterday, Canada Post announced that it would be closing the post office in North Chicoutimi. For months, the people of Chicoutimi have been clear about this. The closure of a profitable and popular post office is unacceptable. Over 2,500 people have contacted Canada Post. But Canada Post and this government would rather stick their heads in the sand. Their answer is disgusting. Will the minister finally listen to the people and reverse the decision to shut down this post office? The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Canada Post has indicated that to deal with the fact that they are no longer self-sufficient and are continuing to see their mail delivery erode, they have put together a 5-point plan. As a result, Mr. Speaker, one aspect of this is to ensure that consumers can actually receive their postal services at places at which they normally frequent, like a Shoppers Drug Mart, like another facility where they can do so. They are contracting out in order to ensure that there's best value for the Canadian dollar, for the Canadian taxpayer, and we are indeed supporting their plan.
The Honourable Member for Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough, West.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians well know this government's role in defending victims of crime and being appropriately tough on serious offenders. This is why I was proud last week when my bill, Fairness for Victims of Violent Offenders, and the Victims' Bill of Rights received royal assent. The NDP and Liberals have been clear that they don't support our agenda whatsoever. So when Bill Blair announced that he was to run for the Liberals, Canadians found this most bizarre. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety please update this House on the measures this Conservative government has taken to crack down on crime?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my honourable colleague for that question. Mr. Speaker, it's true. Our Conservative government has passed over 30 new measures to crack down on dangerous and violent criminals, including tough new prison sentences for drive-by shootings. Shockingly, but not surprisingly, the Liberal leader has said that he will repeal all mandatory minimum sentences in the entire criminal code. The Liberal leader should instead listen to his new candidate, Bill Blair, who said, and I quote, "When we have minimum sentences and we keep criminals in jail, and they're incapacitated, our streets are safer." End of quote. Mr. Speaker, there seems to be a little bit of conflict within the Liberal Party.
The Honourable Member for Random, Buren, St. George's.
Mr. Speaker, Steve and Natalie Wheeler from my riding are in Lukla, Nepal, and are trying to leave. Here is what they said. "We have limited communication from the Canadian government on what to do. We try to keep them up to date with what little progress we've been trying to make in order to leave. And what do we get? An email from the government saying we have updated your file accordingly. Wow. We have received more support, communication, and reassurance from our insurance company. What can Steve and Natalie expect, and when can all Canadians outside the capital expect some real help?"
Hear, hear. Honourable Minister of State.
Mr. Speaker, despite the challenges presented by terrain, weather, congestion of the airport, we are working hard, working around the clock. Our consular officials are working very hard. We have deployed additional consular staff. We have sent hundreds of emergency travel documents. And Canadian Consular Service Point has been established at the American Club, and I'm encouraging Canadians, please, to contact the Emergency Watch and Response Centre for further information.
Member for St. John's South Mount Coral.
Mr. Speaker, Marine Atlantic is a critical link between Newfoundland and mainland Canada, but for weeks now there's been an outstanding question of whether the budget would be gutted, as the main estimates indicated. The minister said to wait for the budget. But then there was no word, not a whisper, about Marine Atlantic in the 518 pages. Now Marine Atlantic is referring all questions to the minister's office. Mr. Speaker, will the minister finally stand in her place and tell Newfoundlanders and Labradorians what is happening with their ferry service?
Honourable Minister of Transport.
I can assure the people of Newfoundland and Labrador that Marine Atlantic will receive the funding it needs to continue to provide the frequency of service Atlantic Canadians are accustomed to.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
The NDP and the Liberals have actually insulted families with older children by saying that they don't have childcare costs. Of course, on this side of the House, we understand that's not true. Residents of Calgary Centre understand that's not true. all families with children, with older children, we're talking kids over 6 here, Mr. Speaker, have child care costs and deserve our support. Can the Minister of State for Social Development please tell this House what our government is doing for families with older children?
The Honourable Minister of State for Social Development.
The member from Calgary Centre is correct. We do know that families who have older children do incur costs in raising those children. That's why we want to give them their money back and put it back in their pocket. Recently, I was in Newmarket, Ontario. I met with high school students and their parents. Those parents were thrilled about the expanded universal child care benefit. It will give them $720 for each one of their children that's in high school, which is a huge benefit for them. They're also thrilled that we've doubled the children's fitness tax credit, and we made it refundable because a lot of those kids are involved in sports activities. We're giving money back to parents, Mr. Speaker. They want to raise taxes.
The honourable member for Chambly-Bordua. While millions of fans of the Montreal Canadiens, and of course Calgary Flames fans too, anxiously await round 2 of the playoffs, along comes another blow to C-377, the Conservatives' blindly ideological anti-union bill. The Hockey Players Association says business deals involving video games, hockey cards, and international competitions could be in jeopardy. Does the government realize that its half-baked bill will adversely affect that part of our national economy that revolves around our national sport? Honourable Minister.
Believes that workers should have the right to know how their mandatory union dues are spent. This is something that Canadians have been asking for, and that's why we continue to support Bill C-377. It's a reasonable bill to increase transparency.
The honourable member for Richmond-Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, banks and fast food chains were rightly and unanimously condemned for abusing the temporary foreign worker program. Now the government's penalizing those who follow the rules. Already struggling with new EI rules, seasonal businesses like restaurants, hotels, food processing plants, and landscapers are in for a particularly rough ride. Will the Minister of Employment respect the Canada-Quebec Accord on immigration and suspend these measures long enough to negotiate with Quebec City, as the Quebec government, the Quebec Federation of Chambers of Commerce, and the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses have all requested? The Honourable Minister of Employment. Mr. Speaker, we believe that Canadians should get priority for Canadian jobs. That includes Quebecers. Quebecers should have priority on Quebec jobs. The data now shows that there are Quebecers available to fill vacancies. Employers should increase wages and try harder to recruit Quebecers. Mr. Speaker, we will always protect the jobs of Quebecers. That is why we made these reforms.
Tabling of documents, Dépôt de documents. The honourable member for Ottawa Centre has a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During question period, the Parliamentary Secretary for the Prime Minister, I'm very glad that he was reading my householder, but he did say that in it that there was information about income splitting, which of course hasn't been passed by Parliament, is not in the document. So I give him the opportunity to actually clarify the record, because I don't put in things that are not accurate in the things that I put out to constituents, unlike the government that puts out advertising about things that actually haven't been passed in Parliament yet.
I see the Honourable Minister of Employment rising.
I am too. Rising in this point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I thought the point of order was raised on the Minister of Employment for having quoted it. I'll go him first and then the Government House Leader. Order. The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, among the many Conservative tax cuts that the NDP member did highlight was income splitting. It is right here on page 12. Pension income splitting is a form of income splitting, and he did trumpet it as a positive policy. We agree with him. He was right. He's wrong now, though.
I know members aren't asking the Speaker to make decisions on terminology. The Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre is rising. It's very concerned. We're getting into an area of debate, and we are well past the end of question period. The Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre.
I respect my friend, of course, same city and all, but I actually was directing at the parliamentary secretary for the Prime Minister. He used to have the job. He no longer does, which is unfortunate, I guess. But the point was income splitting, period.
Okay.
Thank you.
The Honourable Government House Leader now, but then we very much need to move on.
I simply wanted to defend the member for Ottawa Centre and